Okay, here we go. Um, few things I want to talk about today. I have an idea. I have an idea that I want to discuss, which is about meaning and intuition, which I think is fine. Was waiting to get confirmation from someone who shared something with me, but they're busy doing their own things and they're not responding to me. So we'll see how that goes. Gabriel, if you get that, I don't. Okay, what is happening? First, I don't know what is the like and subscribe thing? Can we not do? Can we go away? Yeah, I don't want that. That's obnoxious. Uh, sorry, Caleb. We're here. We are here. Good to have you. I changed the time because I had it initially for PM, but I want AM because AM is what we're doing. Um, okay, little life updates. Let's talk a little bit about life updates. My parents just came to visit me, which doesn't happen a lot because my parents live in Texas. And okay, Grim, I don't know what Levin's bow ties are, but I should maybe check it out. Um, I'm just, this was an idea that I had, and now other people are connecting it with thoughts and structures and their own framings and mathematical connections. And so we'll see. We'll see if I'm seeing something that has, it's probably already been thought of before. But so my parents moved to Texas. I don't even know how long ago. Almost, let's say 18 years ago. Let's guess. Something like that. My sense of time is good. It was after I graduated college, after I was married. Because I grew up in Western South Dakota on a cattle ranch. Ooh, by the way, I'm going to be having an on-ramp radio with Mark D. Parker. We're recording it Monday. So look forward to that. I think his one with Rod Hair is coming out soonish. I can't remember. Um, which I'm excited about. Mark does a great job with that. And also Mark, lean into the personal a little bit more. Maybe a little less idea centric. Which is maybe, I don't know. I don't know if it wasn't consciously in my mind when I sent out a tweet the other day, but I said something like, if TLC loses its person-centric roots, it will go the way of Pangburn and kind of if you remember the intellectual dark web, Um, I think they got a little too political, a little too ideological, a little too scale, a little too let's change the world, and they lost their footing a little bit. All right, my parents were here. It's always fascinating because, I'm in my 40s and I so I haven't it's a bit I've lived a significant portion of my life separate from my parents now, and so this is actually related to the topic. Well, at least part of the topic. We'll see if we get into it. The idea that I'm trying to talk about is complicated. So here's there's a background. It's a bow tie structure. See the bow tie structure? We'll talk about it more in a little while. What's on the back of this again? I don't know. But it's related. The idea of persons being related is that, persons are meant to be loved and not to be used. And also, it's very related that human beings are, and part of the reason is human beings are icons. And so they are infinitely knowable. PBK often will talk about this, is that the more he knows his wife and the longer he's had a relationship with her, in a way, the deeper that he knows her. And that's completely true. But also, like, there's this, I don't know if it's technically reciprocal opening, but there's an infinite amount that you can know about a person. Or Karen Wong asked the question once from the Meaning Code. Karen, she said, what subject, and this definitely applies to people, but what subject have you studied so much and you've gotten to know so much that you've realized there is no end to it? It is infinitely fecund, infinite fecundity. There is And I know that, I've pick any subject. Like you get nerdy about it. I had my book club last night and a friend brought a bottle of it's a local distillery called Brother Justice, which is a local Minnesota distillery. I actually worked there for a while during COVID. And they have a bottle. Essentially, they're doing like single malt whiskey. Japan does single malt whiskey originally. Single malt is, people think Scotch, Scotland, and they do a Minnesota single malt. I'm pretty sure all the grain, or the vast majority of the grain, is sourced from Minnesota. So single malt being only barley, and um, and then they have this patented process of cold peating their whiskey, which is kind of an interesting thing that they discovered. And and I I like whiskey, I like alcohol, I like wine, I like all that stuff. And these things for sure are like that. And so they wanted me to do a little, because that's what I did at the distillery. I did tastings and spoke to people about whiskey because I'm a nerd. And anything that I get into, I go pretty deeply into. I like to learn a lot. I go down the rabbit hole into the parallel alternate universe where there's worlds upon worlds. You can go into the world of whiskey and you realize, oh, that you could talk about this forever. From coming from beer, what different grains, distillation, what kind of columns are we using? What kind of cuts are you using as you distill it out? How do you make the cuts? How do you mix them? How do you do that? Barrel aging, what barrels? It's just you could go on forever with whiskey, and wine is definitely that way because there's such a history to it. Terroir, where the grain's coming from. Any subject is like that. Human beings are also very much like that. So, circling back to my parents, um, it feels like, and all my relationships are this way. My relationship with my wife is this way. My relationship with my kids are this way. The people that I know most intimately in my life, most fully, knowing as you are known, um, I feel like the people that are closest to me are simultaneously, a lot of times, the furthest away. And sometimes this is why love and hate are not opposites. Love and hate, I've said this before, hate is love. It's just misaligned love. It's a love that has not integrated the shadow. You could say that in Jungian terms. It is love that has not been fully perfected by its suffering, and perhaps it's love that has not been perfected hates. And in a sense, perfect love also hates, because it hates the bastardization of that which it loves. And so hate is a kind of love. I would even say that in God. God hates the the defamation and the bastardization and the sullying of his image. So as his image is in us, being images of God, divine sparks, icons, as that is broken and bastardized by sin and by missing the mark, and moves away of what it is meant to be, and we're talking about like in its potential, and then as it's not lived toward that actuality in its becoming what it really is meant to be, God hates that, and rightfully so, and that is his justice and his mercy. So my parents being here, it was, I don't know. It was such a strange phenomenon. I was talking. I mean, not strange. I mean, it was one of the better times that my parents are here, because my family tends to be pretty. So I live in Minnesota now, and Minnesota is very known as being Minnesota nice, which a lot of people. I have a good friend from Australia who moved here, whose wife is Minnesotan, and he says like Minnesota is so different than Australian culture, and it drives him nuts. Because it's Minnesota nice, which on one hand is nice. I'm reminded of the C.S. Lewis quote, um, which I believe is from the first of the Ransom trilogy. It's like one of the first two lines, and ever committed it to memory, and I just mess it up every time I try to say it. But he talks about he says the civility of modern man, half of which is virtue, half of which is vice. And so he says modern civility is half of that, and half of self-control is LARPing. You're trying. It's what's the word that everybody's been talking about in the corner? It is what is all the WWE stuff? Come on, get Sartori. Where are you when I need you? Kayfabe. There it is. Part of your civility is that, because like if you have no filter, which I don't. Kayfabe. Thank you, Rigel, you beautiful man, and Stetson. If you don't, I have less filter than most people, and my first percentile politeness, when we're talking about big five personality things, agreeableness, right? There's the 5 points of the big five personality. Half of agreeableness is politeness. So I'm first percentile. So in a room of 100 people, I am the most comfortable in saying the awkward, difficult, hard thing. Believe it or not, kumbaya. People who think I'm team kumbaya. I'm very comfortable with doing that. And so, but half of that, so when you filter that, half of that is good because you're being loving, you're being empathetic to the other person, but also you're veiling yourself, veiling and unveiling. And so Minnesota Nice is, people describe it this way, like East Coast New York. The best way I've heard it described is New Yorkers will say like, fuck you. And what they really mean is like, hey, I love you. It's okay. It's great. And they're just being intense. In Minnesota, people will say, have a good day. And really it means fuck you. Like that's the flip. Or they'll say, or it's a joke that like Minnesotans will give you directions anywhere except to their house. or they, they're very polite and nice, but really letting you into the deeper part of it is not a very Minnesotan thing. They don't like to let you into the inner rooms of your soul, let's say. They like to keep you in the foyer or on the front step. So my parents are not that way though. And this is where like even the cultural difference in Eastern and Western South Dakota. If you're from the Dakotas, number one, you never say the Dakotas. If you're not from the Dakotas, you call them the Dakotas. And North and South Dakota is the state difference border. Think about it. This in like Richard Rowland, Peugeot, Universal History. Like now we have national borders, but really people groups and tribes and ethnic centers predated tribe, like modern nation states. And so like a lot of people from my church are they're Slavo-Russian people from like what is now modern Czechoslovakia, like that region. But like that people group predates all the modern nations, and the modern nations kind of, even Germany was that way. Like, Prussia predates that. And so like Prussian people are now like, it borders Poland and Germany and different things. South Dakota's that way. The split when we became states from Dakota Territory was North and South, but really the cultural ethnic difference is East and West. And a lot of that's geographical because PDK just recently was in the Black Hills and in, pause just a sec. I have a question from a child. I'll be right back. I have to do something. Just take a few seconds. Okay, I'm back. I had to help someone. So the cultural difference is Eastern and Western. I'm circling back to Minnesota Nice and cultural differences and all that. And so I grew up in Western South Dakota, which is much more like Wyoming, Montana. It is much more like you think the Old West, you think South Dakota, you think hats, you think Deadwood, you think Dances with Wolves, you think frontier, you think homesteading, you think sod houses. That's Western South Dakota. That stuff wasn't really I mean, it maybe was. Laura Ingalls Wilder was Eastern South Dakota, but much more so now. Eastern South Dakota is a lot more like Minnesota culturally, and in all the ways. It's flat. Eastern South Dakota kind of sucks. Sorry. I mean, there's some cool parts of it, but I'm much more. I grew up in Western South Dakota. It has beautiful rolling hills. It has the Badlands. It has the Black Hills, which are some of the coolest. It's some of the coolest geography and landscape in the U.S., and I think it's totally unique. Actually, the Black Hills are pretty cool. So anyhow, I'm from there, and the cultural difference is that in Western South Dakota, it's a lot rougher and gruffer and in your face, and it'll tell you what they think. And it's like John Wayne toilet paper doesn't take shit off you get it. That's a joke that I probably learned in Western South Dakota, because Western South Dakota isn't politically correct at all. And it's much more confrontational, and I have many, many stories about it. I'll tell one quick. Like I had a friend growing up whose name was Brigham, very Western South Dakota name. And he was a neighbor who lived, I don't know, 5 miles away, but that's where I grew up. It's very sparse. It's very rural. I couldn't see another house from my house growing up. I grew up in the middle of a pasture. But he was a neighbor, and we would all get together, helping each other work on cattle and brandings and all that stuff. So I grew up hanging out with him occasionally, and we ended up working a lot, doing construction, because my dad was a carpenter to help pay for all the cattle, and we worked a lot together. And Brigham was one of those guys who you just didn't mess with. I come from a pretty credentialed, like, wrestling town. My town had some really good wrestlers in it. This is maybe outing me, but we had I won't say who it is, I guess, because people could figure it out if they want. But there was a wrestler, they could probably still figure it out if they wanted, from my hometown, who he became a 5-time South Dakota state champion. So he won state wrestling 8th grade on, 5 years. And then he ended up going back to, this is for people who are wrestling nerds. Again, wrestling is one of those things you could go in forever and just talk about it forever. And then he ended up going to, we're getting one of those cool, like, it's sunny out rains right now. Sorry, I just have a front window out here. And then he ended up going and wrestling for the University of Iowa back in the day when Iowa was, like, untouchable. It was like the it school for wrestling, which now is kind of, I mean, Iowa's still good, but I don't know I think it's more diverse now. Penn State's really tough. I don't know. I don't follow it. But anyhow, he went to wrestle for Iowa. He was a 7-time NCAA Division I champion, 4-time. Went and wrestled at the Olympics, and ended up getting 3rd at the Olympics. Lost in the semifinals, I think, by a point. And it was like a huge, devastating disappointment that he got 3rd at the Olympics after all that with his career. One of the best wrestlers to ever wrestle. Wrestled under Dan Gable. Just like that kind of pedigree. And once he was at my school, everybody else, like, it just became a wrestling school, and we were very good at wrestling, and we would wrestle like the biggest schools, Sioux Falls and Rapid City, in our state, and we would beat them as this little tiny school of like 1,000 people. It was a really good school. And anyhow, this guy Brigham wrestled 189, which for a high schooler, if you know anything about wrestling and high schoolers, a 189-pound kid in high school who is trim, who, like, isn't overweight and muscular, like, a 189-pound wrestler is a beast. Even in, you think boxing, UFC, any sort of combat sport, a man who is 190 pounds and in shape and thin and muscular is a monster. Like, that's a big dude. He's not like, they're not the biggest. They're not like the heavyweights. There are bigger people, and there's like NFL players or whatever. But compared to the average person, like, that's a beast. I don't know. Like, an average man is like 106. Like, a average size weight man is like 160 pounds. Something like that. And so that's a big boy. And he was the kind of guy. This is the Western South Dakota difference, where, like, I don't know if anybody grew up going to like parties and house parties in high school and college, but it's one of those things. And guys, there can be kind of a fighting culture, and guys can have a little bit of bravado and act tough, and it's kind of like bowing up your chest and you act tough to guys. And Western South Dakota is just the kind of place where like you don't, it's not smart to do that, because there were a lot of guys that I grew up with where like if you acted tough with them and you made, if you were just trying to feign toughness with either your language or your body, uh you'd find out pretty quick who was tough. Because like there were some people that wouldn't put up with that. In Brigham, I remember specifically a party where some guy was there from another town, and things happen, girls, people are drinking, stuff's happening, and someone like bowed up to him, acted tough, and Brigham just didn't hesitate. He just punched him in the face and then followed him to the ground and just like kept hitting him. And he told me that. Like, I remember him having this conversation with me. He's like, Luke, if anybody acts tough to you, just punch them in the face and then just keep punching them on the ground until you are absolutely confident they want no part of you and don't want to get up. That's an example of Western South Dakota culture compared to Eastern South Dakota culture. It's just people are built different. It's just a different kind of breed. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It just is. That's the culture. Like, I came from that culture. My family comes from that culture. I was very much a soft boy in that culture, relatively, I think. Weird, outsider, and outcast. A lot of this stuff I didn't realize until I was much older, because I developed coping mechanisms for it because I had to survive, in a lot of ways, my dad is very like he's kind of a watch Hallmark videos, teddy bear, cry, but like very brash, tough man. One of the hardest working people I've ever known in my life, just like unbelievable. The kind of guy who like got kicked by a cow and his knee started swelling up and got to the place where it wouldn't move. So he just took like a veterinary syringe and just like would pull liquid off of his knee until he could bend it more. And then he'd go back to work. That's where I come from. So that's like even Nick, free willing, if he's here, like this is like when people start talking about elitism and being intellectual, and when people have a certain conception of me and what I am and think it's like some sort of like academic. And number one, I'm not that academic or well read or anything. I like philosophy, but like I come from it's almost hard, it's very, very difficult to have much more of a blue collar pedigree than I do. All right. So my parents were here. And so like, that's where I come from. I have often said I'm half redneck, half hillbilly. This is all, maybe Mark Parker should just watch this. We should skip our on-ramp radio. They were here, and and my dad, as I've often said, would always say, "Who sired you, boy?" So my dad is he's a brilliant man in a lot of ways, almost kind of Aspergery, like mathematically just brilliant. Like you play cards with him, he just knows what you have in your hand. He's such a good card player. It's annoying. Like I'll play this card game pitch with him, or even poker, or my son was playing some with him while he was up here. And he's like, "How do you know what I have?" And he just laughs because he just knows. He's just good at that kind of stuff. And just like simple math calculations for like carpentry and stuff. He just does it automatically, like almost like savant level. And then my mom and my mom's side is much more, I don't know, very different. Very, and she's like very religious, always. Like my dad's very religious too, but my mom was like the intellectual religious, Bible studies all the time, very morally rigid and tough. That's where a lot of my Christian background heritage stuff comes from. Like it was there in my dad, but he's not intellectual about it. He doesn't talk about it at all. So they're here. And as you can imagine, and as people know the trajectory of my life, where I've gone with the doctrine of hell, being kind of a naughty boy in college and high school, but like identifying as a Christian and then making my faith my own, checking out a bunch of churches, going to Greg Boyd's church and then John Piper's church, being young, restless, and reformed, and being in like Calvinist charismatic camps for a long time, Sovereign Grace, C.J. Mahaney, Josh Harris world for a long time. And then I start reading emergent authors and Rob Bell and all these different people, Brian McLaren, blah, 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 all these people. And I just always keep reading things. John Stott, and John Stott becomes universalist, and I start studying the doctrine of hell, and hell is one of those topics. Go as deep as you want. You can study the doctrine of hell forever, and it's wild, like it's hell is like anything. Wine is this way. I remember this is the same with hell, but I remember reading an article once about this master sommelier who I know like a little bit. I'm an acquaintance of his. And he's a cool guy. And I remember reading an article about him. He's a master sommelier. So wine, if you know anything about a master sommelier, they know a lot about wine. And the first the first sentence of the article said something like, he's forgotten more about wine than you'll ever know, which is a perfect way to describe it, because it's true. I think it's completely true. I'm not, I don't, for a autodidact, non-academic lay person, let's put it that way, I'm kind of that way about hell. I've studied the doctrine of hell a lot. I obsessed over it. Like I was saying, I go deep into anything I go into, and I study it a lot. I grew up a traditionalist, eternal conscious torment. I became an annihilationist after I watched a debate with Chris Date and someone else. I was an annihilationist for a long time because I was a Protestant and because I had sola scriptura commitments. And Jordan Daniel Wood said this in his last podcast with J.D. Lionheart about that. He said, like, it's pretty easy. Like, it's not like he would say, and I would agree, that if you're just going off sola scriptura exegetical arguments, annihilationism is the view. If you're going off Western traditional arguments, which is like J.D. Lionheart's going to have a guy on, I forget his name, who's going to defend the eternal conscious torment, infernalist, traditionalist view. And that's his main argument. He says, like, I affirm tradition so much that I am an infernalist. ECT, I don't know what he would call it. I'm a traditionalist is probably the non-polemical way to say it. The problem is like, which tradition? Again, like, there's a lot of variety going on with all that. And now I identify as a universalist. Although, like, what you mean by all these things, okay, now we're going to get into the main topic, bow tie. What you mean by it. Meaning and intuition. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this. So my idea, I'm going to try to describe it, and then Jess, if you're watching, after I start describing it, you can come in at any time, because Jess has more nuance and ways of his understanding this that I think will add complexity and hopefully not complicate it, because on one level, this is what I'm going to try to explain is simple, but you can add a lot of complexity to it. Like that's how these things work, because there's infinite rabbit holes and complexity and interconnectedness with all these things. So the main idea that I had with it has to do with what is intuition and pattern recognition. And I had this idea, it's almost like it's related to a form of calculus. So like, if you understand, like, what's the term? Basic theory of calculus. Do I have another piece of paper? I probably don't. So a lot of calculus, you have a curve, right? This is an article about Charles Williams and the Companions of Coherence. Very good article, by the way. Quick aside, this article is so good. It's like, what, 50 pages or something like that? Normally, I would never read anything like this. People that know me know I don't read stuff like this very much anymore. But I did. I read this. So like, the general theory of calculus is and this is how integrals work, is you can draw dots along this line. Where are we at? Over here. And you keep drawing dots, like, and imagine like up to an infinite amount of dots. And at that dot, on the curve, you set up a perpendicular line to the curve, to the space of the curve at that line. And as you draw an infinite amount of those, there's this interesting thing that happens, and I'm not a mathematician, but where you make an integral and you can calculate the space, the area under a curve using this as it approaches infinity linear thing. See, I'm not going to be right about this. Risto, I mean, people that know math will listen. I'm not, and this is related to what I'm talking about, because I am not part of this is right brain, left brain, but it also will map onto my bow tie thing. So anyhow, the point is another way to think about it is this. I don't know what this rule is in math, but like if you think about there's 2 points on like a line, right? It's like 2 points on a line. The space between these points, and think about this algebraically, like it doesn't matter. I mean, you could illustrate it. Let's say 4. The space between it is 4. 4 units of what? 4 inches, because, screw the metric system, right? Yeah, I'm totally using Terrence Howard physics. Terrence Howard and me probably are on similar wavelengths, although he's even better at, although people would say, like, Eric Weinstein would say he's still sloppy, but he's much better than I am at actually explaining these things in a way, which is part of my whole point of intuition and meaning. So this is 4, the space between it. If you have it, right, you put a dot in between it, you have 2 and 2, right? You can continue having that forever, right? You could have it again, 1. You can have 1, 0.5. You can have 0.5, 0.25. You can have that, 0.125. You can keep having that infinitely. So Jess told a joke that he heard somewhere, and he probably he could say it better than this, but it's the difference. You could think of it this way. It's the difference. There's a mathematician and an engineer, and they were told that there's these women in lingerie that are a space away from. So it's a male. It's a heterosexual, cis-normative male, red-blooded, meat-eating male. And there's these beautiful women in lingerie that are away from them. And then they're presented with this problem, and they say, like, they're this distance from you, and every minute you can have the distance and get closer to them. And instantly the mathematician is in despair, and he's like, we'll never get there. But the engineer is instantly happy, and he's just like, well, it won't, like, yes, technically, intellectually, abstractly, we will never get there. But he's like, I'll get close enough, because engineers are concerned with good enough to work. Like, it doesn't matter, and that's I forget, Jess knows the term, but it's kind of like margins of error, and he used the illustration that he had heard from somewhere of, like, when you're building a piston, a piston in an engine, maybe the distance that you want between the piston and the wall of the engine block has to be like 1/10,000th of a inch or millimeter. Tolerances, thank you. My engineer friends, you can come and correct me with all this stuff later. Is Zeno's paradox? Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. I don't know the names. What's in a name? And so, like, in an engine, you need a very small gap. This gap, the distance matters. It needs to be very small. But like when you're building a house and framing, something I'm a lot more familiar with, you're working at the 16th of an inch, maybe a 32nd of an inch if you're being, like, super precise about something. But like, and Jess made this point. This is very, dude, what are we? Okay. I got the calculus right? Yeah. Yes. Woo! Jess, you can come in at any time. But then when you're dealing with, like, construction, and especially wood, the tolerances are way larger because it doesn't matter. And you actually want them. That's a good thing, because hot and cold, getting wet, movement, that stuff has to move. If it's too tight, the stuff won't work. Like, you'll build a drawer or a cabinet that all of a sudden will get stuck and you can't even open the door. So it won't work if you try to build it like you're building the piston. So So all that to say, I'm still describing the bow tie, Jess. I have 35 minutes. I haven't even.
I still don't understand it, so let me know.
I've only just begun to explain.
I just popped in because I enjoyed hearing you tell the joke.
Okay, thank you. You probably do it better, but
I like the engineer saying, "I'll get close enough."
yeah, yeah, it'll work. It doesn't matter.
For all practical purposes.
That's right. That's right.
Okay,
So,
continue.
so you have all these distances between things. Now, what I should have looked up, and what I would like to play here is there's a really great video of Jonathan Peugeot talking about faith, and he essentially talks about faith. What he describes as faith is what I'm trying to describe as intuition. It's the leveling up. It's the seeing. It's the seeing which can never be, which you can never quantitatively reach, no matter how many pieces or parts or segments you combine. You're never going to get to the step of faith to see the thing that is above the level that's required, like the pure vision, the perception of. He always describes the cup, right? Like you can think about all the different parts of the cup, and we do these things so naturally and intuitively that I think we don't deconstruct what we're actually doing. So like you can see a chair and it's the summary of all these parts, but you just do that naturally and automatically, and you say chair and you think, well, that's just obvious, and I'm just. And then you map onto it all these narratival understandings of like how you got there, which is all post hoc rationalizations. It's not actually what's happening in the nature of your perception. These are like conversations I have with T-Grog all the time. You just see the cup and you can't explain it. This is very related to the George MacDonald quote that I love so much, is like where he says, like, I'm sorry, from Lilith, I'm sorry I can't explain the thing to you. I but barely apprehend it myself. And the fact is, no man understands anything. You only think you understand it because you're familiar with it. But your familiarity is not understanding. It's just familiarity. You have a kind of understanding. You have a practical, real, relational, lived in the world understanding. But you don't understand it in the way that you think you understand it. And this is the postmodern critique of a lot of modernity, and it's also the, what is it, nominal versus narratival critique that Vervaeke was talking about for a while. I think it's this: you don't really understand what cupness is. You're just familiar with it, and you just see it, and then you post hoc rationalize that it's a combination of all these smaller parts, but that's part of your like discursive reasoning that's happening afterwards. It's effective. It's map and territory stuff. This is what Ian McGilchrist says. So like here, what I'm trying to describe is seeing the distance between the two spaces, because again, right, there's infinite spaces. You could break it down forever. Whenever someone is at this part of the bow tie, which you could go down or you could go up, this is where perception is happening. Whenever you are seeing the space between two gaps and you see that space and it makes sense to you, what you're doing is, I think that's what perception is, but it's also what intuition is, because you think at any one of the points when you're seeing cup, what you're doing is you're seeing the pattern or the connection between those two spaces, although you could go down then into the rabbit hole of that space and break it apart forever. This is like what Indy Wilson talks about when he talks about like what is matter. Or it's a lot of what Ian McGilchrist's book, like The Matter with Matter, is like when he's breaking apart like the pickup truck and he says, what's this made of? Metal. Well, what's metal? And you can keep going down the thing forever, all the way down to like the smallest elemental particle that we know. But even when you get there, again, you could keep going forever. There's still infinite gaps. At the absolute smallest particle, you could keep breaking it apart forever. And the bottom line is that none of us know what those things are, but yet we have unavoidable relations with all these things, and so we know what it is. This is the problem with modernity, scientism, people as they approach AI and think they understand information knowledge, you could have infinite facts. And guess what? That's what facts are. There are infinite facts. This is why salience matters. You could have an infinite amount of information and it will never get you any bit closer to meaning. Because meaning is that faith, that magical thing that just sees the infinite gap between any 2 points and sees it. Now, my point with this chart is that intuitors, I want to share this thing from Gabe, and then Jess can come back, and then I'll open it up. Gabe, hopefully you're okay with me sharing this. Did you reply? Sorry, I'm checking to see if he replied. He has not. He has not seen it. He is working. He doesn't have time for this live streaming bullshit. All right, I'm going to share it anyhow. And, better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Although I tried to ask for permission. It's not my fault he has a job. So when I was trying to describe this to him, which I gave him a shorter version of all of this without so many asides about my personal life. I'm a personalist. Sorry, deal with it. He said, reminds me of this, the bow tie structure, which I didn't even, it obviously looks like a bow tie when you turn it to the side. And he said it refers to a conceptual or organizational framework used across various scientific disciplines to describe systems with a specific pattern of information flow, control, or organization. It typically features a central knot where diverse inputs converge, are processed, and then diverge into diverse outputs resembling the shape of a bow tie. So I had a few images of this. I'm thinking of the torus. I don't know how to... I'm thinking of this in a number of ways. I'm thinking of a spiral. I'm thinking of spiral dynamics because it kind of has that same shape, a spiral, which allows for further up and further in. I'm thinking of, the ladder of divine ascent, up and down, heaven and hell, waters above, waters below, angels and demons, your telodic, whitestone name, your false self, whatever. It's all simultaneous antinomies, simultaneous reciprocities, all this stuff. So the central knot, back to Gabe, where diverse inputs converge. So Gabe is actually making, I commissioned him to make I don't know what you call it, a work of art for me. So he's working on this. Because Gabe is I should find he spoke to PBK. Gabe's a beautiful, brilliant kind of sane schizophrenic illustrator, where he I'm trying to think of some of the images. I don't want to show any of his personal images that he shared with me, but he has some that I know are more public. Let me find something. And so I have an idea of an image that I can't really describe to you, but it's kind of related to this okay, so I know this is a public thing. This is an image that Gabe has made. Look at that. Just crazy, awesome, psychedelic, fractal stuff. So you could almost think, this, the center of this, you could almost think of as the center of this knot, or the center of a torus. I'm gonna look up an image of a torus and show you guys what it is. Where's one that actually works as a GIF? Thank you. Here's one. Let's share this screen. Share screen. Torus. Share. Okay, can we see this? So this here is a torus. So if you think almost of the bow tie, but then if you think about it three-dimensional, and the center of the torus is that space, that knot, which, like I said, it's infinitely compoundable. What's the word? That you could break it apart forever and you never actually get there, in the ideal space, in the abstract space, in the general space, right? And nothing exists in general. It only ever exists in particular. But yet that is the fecund source of all things. You could think about it at the center of a black hole, perhaps. Maybe it's the singularity from which all things emerge. The problem is my image, and what Gabe's trying to do for me is make an image like this, but not an abstract, theoretical, Hellenistic one. He's trying to make one that's Christ, the eternal Tao. So Jesus Christ, the person, is the center of that thing. This is my idea, but I think it's related to, and this is the weird thing, right? Is like either you're intuitive, maybe you're right-brained, or you're more focused, logical. Okay, I'm going to close this so you can see more. Or you're maybe, look at my, let's go spike it. Spike it. Or you're more left-brained, focused, logical, analytical, getting into the precision of it. But here's the thing, if this is really a Taurus, you know, like whatever, follow it all the way down, trampling death by death, go all the way to death. And guess what? You find out if you do it in love, you find out that in there's life. And part of that is because there is only one reality. Where will I go to escape your presence? If I ascend to the heights, you're there. If I go to the depths, you're there. Because from you, all things come, right? What's the verse? To whom, through whom, and by whom are all things. What is that passage? Jess, do you know what I'm talking about? About Christ? Come on, give it to me.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Whom, in whom are all things. Is that a verse? Are we talking about it? Bible, 1 Corinthians 8. 1 Corinthians 8, yeah. Yet there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we unto him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and we through him. You know, there's a lot of passages that are like that. But whatever, it's not coming to me exactly. And also, if you're trying to work, do that. So anyhow, that's the idea of the bow tie. So seeing, and this is the thing that can never be explained. It can never be broken down, no matter how. This is my point. The meaning, and I'm going to continue quoting this until it finally takes seed in the consciousness of TLC. The Malcolm Guite clip where he's talking about George MacDonald, and he's talking about the imagination essay, where he does a whole lecture on it, where he reads. It's from A Dish of Orts, actually, is what the book's from. So maybe is the imagination essay in The Dish of Orts? Anyhow, it's a great lecture. If you YouTube it, you can find it. But he says meaning isn't conveyed, meaning is awakened. And that's why it's awakened, because you can't convey it. You can't transactionalize it. You can't explain it. No matter how many facts, how much information, no matter how much talking you do, you can never get there. There is no mechanism to get to meaning, to get to true understanding, which is why it's ultimately rooted in love. And I think this is what personalist knowing is all about. It's knowing as you are known, which is summarized pretty brilliantly in that Viktor Frankl quote. Maybe I'll end with that. Viktor Frankl, knowing by love. Quote, where is it? Give it to me. Oh, give it. Here we go. I did find it. This is a different way to find it, but I found it. And then I'll open it up and we can talk to other people. Viktor Frankl.
I have something to share from Chesterton.
Okay. Let me read this quote and then you can do it. Okay. So it says, love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality, maybe his essence, right? The center of him. And this is where, one last aside, this is like the Peter Rollins Church of the Contradiction. Maybe the unity that holds everything together is that we are infinitely set apart and contrasted to everything else. And this is something Jess and I spoke a lot about, which we'll probably get into when we start talking. But so no one can become fully aware of the essence of another human being unless he loves him. By his love, he is enabled to see the essential traits and features of the beloved person. And even more, he sees that which is potential in him, which is not yet actualized. And that's the love and hate thing, but yet ought to be actualized. Furthermore, by his love, the loving person enables the beloved person to actualize these potentialities. By making him aware of what he can be and of what he should become, he makes these potentialities come through. And I think a lot of that's by suffering. And that's actually exactly what this whole article is about, which is coherence, which is the English word for perichoresis, actually. All right. I also have your little drawing pulled up if you want to talk about that, but go ahead and read some
Yeah, we
Chesterton.
can. This is Chesterton and his essay uh, about the Book of Job. I love this essay. Um, he so this is partway through. Um, he says third. So he's just talking about the subject of the Book of Job and about the argument between, or about the speech of God at the end. He says, thirdly, of course, it is one of the splendid strokes that God rebukes alike the man who was accused and the men who defended him, that he knocks down pessimists and optimists with the same hammer. And it is in connection with the mechanical and supercilious comforters of Job that there occurs the still deeper and finer inversion of which I have spoken. This is the point that I want to emphasize. The mechanical optimist endeavors to justify the universe avowedly upon the ground that it is a rational and consecutive pattern. He points out that the fine thing about the world is that it can all be explained. That is the one point, if I may put it so, on which God in return is explicit to the point of violence. God says, in effect, that if there is one fine thing about the world as far as men are concerned, it is that it cannot be explained.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
that's my Chesterton mic drop.
It's a good one.
It was good.
I do love a lot of Chesterton, which I have not read a lot of things. The only book of his that I've ever read, although I have a few that I just haven't dove into, sorry, Nick, is The Man Who Was Thursday, which I loved, which apparently later on in his life he didn't like as much because he wrote it when he was young and he thought he was too romantic or whatever. But I was like, no, that book's the shit.
Mm-hmm.
like, like get back in touch with your younger self because that book's good.
I was just talking to my friend about Chesterton, and I've never read his fiction. I've read like, what is it, Orthodoxy, and then a
Hmm.
long, long time ago, and then I have a book of his that I never finished about Thomas Aquinas and um, and Francis of Assisi, which they that those two books, the Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas book, have it in one volume, but apparently he like just dictated those two books in like a week, like from memory.
Wow.
That guy was great. Oh, you
Yeah.
want me to talk? You want
Yeah, if
this
you
was?
wanna you can talk about what if you've gotten any deeper understanding of what I was trying to explain to you privately and then talked about a bunch here,
I
or
mean,
if it
just to
relates.
add this to the conversation, because
Yeah.
this is kind of how my brain works. So when I was trying to grapple, I was learning about Vervaeke's four types of knowing, and so this was my trying to make sense of it, and so
Mhm.
it's all wrong. But there may be the main thing is that there's like on the left part there, it's mostly concerned with the points, the facts, the definitions of things, and so like the propositional is just that the point or the fact, and the procedural are is the ordering and operation of those in like sequence or whatever. So the procedural is just sequencing facts or whatever. And then where on the right side is dealing with a lot more of the curve stuff that you were alluding to. And that's the visual I used. So you're more concerned with the curvature and shape of things as if it was a sheet of fabric, or at least a 3D form that has a complexity that's not reducible to something procedural. Like it just is, it's too complex necessarily to for most people. Super geniuses do this. They'll like look at a complex shape and then map all the points on it, and and sometimes it's super helpful. But anyway, you can more likely just uh, perceive and grasp the shape of it, um, and you do that on this right side, and then the participatory. You can see that there's the intermeshing of these shapes. So it it has to do a lot with embodiedness. I also have it divided top and bottom, with imaginal at the top, embodied at the bottom. So like procedures, you're usually enacting, and the participatory, you're usually enacting, and it's usually too complex to try to necessarily um, describe exactly. But there are like, so in between those, I have like, so if you're going from the participatory to the procedural, like some people are able to do this, like good teachers will be able to uh, do something and then teach someone how to do it like step by step. So like you'll see like really good skateboarders that are also really good teachers, and they'll do that. They'll be like, "All right, here are the steps that I do." And they may not be thinking of it when they learn it or whatever, but here's the steps I do, and they break it down. You got to push down here, you got to flick your toe like this, and then the board will do this, and then you're wanting to bring your feet down. Stuff like that. Not everyone can do that. Like there's a little interview with Meryl Streep talking about acting, and the
Yeah.
interviewer is like asking her about how do you do what you do, and she's like, I don't know, I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
explain it to you.
Yep.
But there are actors that can tell you exactly how they do it, just like that skateboarder can explain the trick. Now that doesn't mean necessarily, like when you break it down into steps, you can see even just in the visuals here, going from the intermeshed shape of the
Yep.
participatory to a procedural thing, that may be a stepping stone to learning, but the procedural does not encompass what it feels like to do a kickflip. Like
Yeah.
basically the procedural is there to get you to feel what a kickflip feels like so that
Right.
you can then do it.
Well, and
And
all this is related to like flow and transjectivity because even that's what you were saying, like Meryl Streep can't tell you how to act like she acts. But there are some people that can really break it down. But then this is related to all the things I've been talking about. So then you might say like, so then someone who's very like very left-brained, more on like, and there's no judgment here, but like on the autistic side of the spectrum versus like the schizotypal side of the spectrum, which I think those things map. They'll say, okay, well, I will do all those things and I will act. And as they can, and this is probably where I would go with like, what's the Jordan Hall called it? What's the term of like going with rhythm to like
tone,
the
yeah,
tone, but like what's the word he uses? What's the
tone,
tone term? No, but it's like a P word.
pitch,
No. Because he
propositional,
no, because it's from the like rhythm to whatever.
pattern.
Nope.
I
It'll
always
come.
heard him say from rhythm to tone. So
It
he's like,
is. That's like the illustration that he's using, but then he has like an adjective name for it,
no,
for the tonal period. And it but like so like essentially like you go the point is, and this is kind of what the autistic person is trying to do, but what I'm arguing with this is like no matter how close you get, you're still infinitely far away from the actual flow state, from actually acting, from actually doing the kickflip, because that's the magical piece of faith or perception or intuition that is truly a gift that can only be awakened and received, that cannot be willed. This is my point with all that. Is like you can never get there quantitatively because it's a qualitative difference. And so like he'll say that you do this and this and this and this, but then all of a sudden you get to the place where like it becomes a tone,
mm-hmm.
and then you're in a different you're kind of like in a different realm. But I think where that actually happens, because if you're still breaking it down quantitatively, you'll never actually get to the true tone, the true singing,
Yeah,
because too
but
many
I
gaps.
mean, for to his point, like when it's at the point of tone, you perceive it as tone. You don't perceive it as rhythm anymore. Like our perception makes that shift, and
Yes,
so then we
that's what I'm
talk
talking
about
about.
tones and rhythms separately, and like
But that perception in and of itself is a gift. It's not something that can be
yeah,
willed.
yeah, it's something you just have, or and some people are
Yes.
better at it than others,
Yes.
and well, and I mean just to build on your metaphor there, but once you have a tone, once you have a da, then you can start importing rhythm again, da 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 da, and then you have now you have a rhythm and a tone at the same time, and you have a melody, and then you build on that.
Right. Sorry. And also, sorry, Michael Stetson, I apologize for. See, this is where CW gave me shit for the way that I run my live streams, where it's just like the little tiny screen with the comments over here on my little laptop. And he makes fun of me because I don't have like a dual screen giant setup where I can see all these things. But what happens when I go full screen? Then I can't see that you beautiful people want to come in and chat. And that's no good. So,
All right.
We just thought you were ignoring them.
I know.
I don't know. I figured you guys were finishing up what you were going to say before you interrupted with new faces.
Well, we were, but also I also have faith in you that through the slow procedural training of TLC, I can let people in and they know how to have a good conversation and not interrupt.
If there was a button to let the world in, Luke would press it.
I don't know. I mean, boundaries are good. That's where they're necessary.
Everyone with an internet connection.
Yeah. I mean, I would want to, but like that's where I want to jump to the universal kairotic moment where like God is all in all. But I also know that, you just can't do that. I can't force that. I can't will it, Oh, talk amongst yourselves.
Okay, we're talking amongst ourselves.
Well,
Luke just dips. All right, Michael.
Well, I thought I was going to bring in, especially since you just mentioned the thing about like the autistic type people, and because I've been thinking about this from my own experience, and then also like looking at my kids that are definitely like on the spectrum to various degrees and stuff, and like this is what the way I'm kind of piecing things together, because when we talk about like, oh, you're like an autistic person being too left-brained, that's a symptom of their inability to like function in social situations, essentially. But I don't think that. But I don't think that they are less intuitive. I think they're probably actually more intuitive to begin with, like because the well, it's a mixed thing, because one of the symptoms is a heightened sensory sensory overwhelm or whatever. So they see more, they hear more. There's a problem sometimes differentiating, like, so what happens is the problem is differentiating what is most important. And I think that what happens, especially like in a social setting, is that having more information, some people pick up on patterns of like behavior and body language, and they do recognize these facial expressions, things like that. But as a little kid is trying to put the pieces together to understand what those things mean, they are probably noticing more than the person intends to express. And so essentially, they pick up on things that like a speaker may be unconsciously communicating. And you get this all the time, because you'll have like autistic kids come off as super rude because they just point out like rude things about people, because they're noticing things that they're supposed to ignore. And I think what essentially happens is that the bad experience of that, it's like a gaslighting that leads them to focus way more on the kind of left brain propositional knowledge, logical things, the sort of things that will yield certainty, because it's too overwhelming to try to figure out whatever's going on. And I think that this is really clear in the sense of like, it's because people are sinful and inconsistent, and we don't know when we're being selfish and rude when we communicate, or we don't know what we're speaking like. And so like I could see that even in my own perception, like I think like I saw people were like, this guy is he's kind of a jerk or something, and then everybody else would be like, no, that guy's really cool or whatever, and I'm like, he seems like a jerk to me, and then they're like, no, you're crazy, and then I'm like, okay, well, I guess I don't know, I guess I can't tell anything about how people's character or whatever. And then meanwhile, some time later you find out, oh, that guy was a jerk and he was hiding all this like secret stuff. So then it's like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to doubt your ability to trust your intuition, and you're going to go hard into the facts. And so and I think that you can see that when you get like those really genuine people with like a lot of integrity or whatever. I think about like somebody like Mr. Rogers. You look at like the way like kids with like special needs and stuff, like how like they can resonate with somebody like that, like who's not, he's a normal adult, but it's just he has a lot of like integrity. He's not hiding things. He's living his life in such a way so that the face that he puts forward reflects like what's on the inside. And so like so then somebody who has a hard time, they can quickly assess like, here's somebody I can trust. So so anyway, I think that's a kind of a thing I've been working through in like that intuition. It can be damaged if you don't get the right feedback from people.
I agree with that. My wife works with autistic children, and then she comes home and works with this autistic child. But so I've got the ADHD, the neurospicy thing going on. My cousins have full blownsies or whatever, but I always thought that there was probably a few different genetic archetypes of what we just call a blanket thing, autism. I was like, yeah. I remember I left a comment like 5 years ago somewhere, I think on a Steven Crowder post where he was mocking the newfangled view of autism and how everyone has it and it's an excuse to be a bad person or whatever. And I was saying, well, actually, it is that the diagnostic criteria have opened up and we have some newer understandings. And but I was like, but I do think these actually are kind of different things. What some people experience is significantly different. They don't have a nonverbal stage. There's different kinds of things going on. And then recently a study did vindicate my prediction. And there are at least right now 4 major archetypes of autism, and so or what we call autism, and so that's kind of interesting. I agree with you that can be damaged, that perception. I know with me that's been the case. My family is all very sincere. We can be and when we're being together with the family, it's safer. And one of the reasons I like this the TLC here. Oh dang it! 1 second. That's my AC. I'm gonna go turn it off. That's really annoying.
Wait with bated breath. Risto, have you said anything yet?
No. You mentioned, I'm just popping in for a little bit. You mentioned math. I have to pop in.
Okay.
Math is
thank God. It's someone who actually knows how to do some math.
Well, I don't know about that.
No.
You did get the calculus right. I'm raising 4 kids, homeschooling them. It's really interesting to see how the 4 different kids approach math. People think of math as very left brain, but math is right brain, especially the further along you get.
Absolutely. As are most things.
And so like my 4 kids are wired differently. Some of them are more like left brain, very like human calculator, and other ones are more like hippie artistic. And they each get different math problems correct, when they have to work through a word problem. So it's not like one person has a corner on the market. So then I think like propositionally and intuitively, neither has totally a corner on the market of knowing. I think we kind of adopt the one that we want that supports our current conclusion. If my current conclusion isn't matching with a proposition, then I'm going to say, no, it's the intuitive, or vice versa. Whereas like humility, I think maybe propositionalism and intuition, maybe they kind of circle around and meet at some point.
Taurus, baby.
Yeah.
Like a Taurus, baby. Yeah, that's something I was thinking as as Stetson, as you were talking, or maybe it was Michael. And Stetson, you can go back and finish what you were saying. But it's humility is so key. You know, I think of that Lewis quote. It's like, it's not a virtue, but without it, there can be no virtue. And it's very similar to my when I say, like, Sherry says you have to be open to what you don't want to know, or I say you have to be open to the truth outside the truth you currently apprehend. Because if you're not open to that thing, you can never, that's actually what the periphery is from, like, your focal awareness and your salience. If you're not open to something that's outside of your salience, all you do is hyper focus forever into this kind of hell. That's where error, Peterson describes it that way. Error manifests in, like, this not working. But in order to see error, you have to be open to, like, oh, this is telling me something true. Like, I'm operating wrong, instead of just like what I call the gospel of just try harder, which is like the typical Ouroboros of theology that I was raised in. Like, it's not working. Well, just believe it harder. Just will it more, you know?
Yeah, that's a dynamic that makes universalists all the time. I don't, I have holes in my brain from trying to be an infernalist for 25 years, and the holes got there because I, wasn't able to sleep for about 25 years, starting from about age 10, just with dreams of hell all the time. Then my body would start. If I felt myself falling asleep, I would get a jolt of adrenaline because of the traumatic experiences that would happen. And I only, that was a big driver away from faith for me. But yeah, so anyways, back to like autism and stuff. Yeah, there's all kinds of I think perceptive modes that autistic people have. There's a thing with neuron extinction that is in most autistic brains. So the connections, the pattern recognition, I think is in part related to the fact that there's brain imaging of autistic brains where there'll be a neuron that's cutting through more strata layers of neuronal tissue and connect, and so you don't have as much die-off of old networks, and so there is a sense, and that causes like obsessive thinking styles, which OCD, which I have, is often comorbid with autism. And so because you kind of can't drop something as easily, which, that's why, there's a correlation between ADHD and certain, I think one of the types of autism, the hyperfocus
That's what I have.
is an obsession with, is a kind of obsession with what you're doing. And so I think, when you have these kind of neuronal structures and these mode networks that don't properly kind of have the right amount of die-off for I don't know, an optimized human life among other humans in social groups, but instead it ends up being optimized for pattern recognition, maybe incidentally, just because of the nature of what's happening there. Because we're all, everything's got periodicity, to bring in what was being talked about before. So we call it when a rhythm or a beat accelerates to the point where we perceive it at a different resolution. I call these resolutions of a fractal, and it becomes what we call tone, right? That I don't know, that in music you call that periodicity. Everything is periodic, right? Which is why even in heaven, like the angels are worshiping in groups of words of 3, holy, 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 and then they fall down, and then there's like this recapitulation constantly, even in heavenly places. That is what is necessary, I believe, for time to exist. Is just is this conceptual, like taking like what would be like a 2D thing, like a circle, right? Anything that's got a rhythm or maybe something that's got a beginning and an end, and making it like 3D. And using that as a basis to have these larger, I don't know, one-time structures of like a single life or whatever. I don't know. There's probably something in there. I'm not sure. I'm finished thinking about it yet. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, just the last quick point, to think of just, the thing is, it's like, if you think about how, like autistic, and, I'm saying I have both the ADD and the autism together, they kind of like cancel each other out in some ways, or they make it possible to act a little more functional, because I get bored of a rabbit hole. I can't go as deep. I need to find something new. But if you think about like what like when a kid latches onto something like trains or whatever, that's an intuitive thing, that there is like an infinite wonder there. But
Mhm.
even if he's very verbal, all he can ever express to other people is the propositional details that he learns about it. So like, you'd be like, wow, you know a lot about trains, but that's not, but none of those things are the thing that are keeping him fascinated about trains. That thing is deeper. And so I think it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a way that God has made some people's brains in a way to enjoy the wonder of creation. But if, they're not, depending on how they're treated by other people, sometimes they can get punished pretty bad for that difference.
Yeah, I think we should call that hyperbolic qualia. So it's when your perception of maybe a series of propositions in a system goes to that next resolution in your mind, and so you're able to perceive, like, it's the autistic child being obsessed with trains and just repeating a bunch of facts, and like, why are these facts? Why do you keep repeating them? Well, they're accessing some kind of qualia that is like, no, when I behold the entirety of this subject matter, I'm getting a perception and I'm trying to get it out to you, but I don't know how to get it to you. I have that a lot with people, and so then I try and make paintings like, well, it's like this thingy, look at this and tell me, and then think about this subject and tell me if that does anything for you. It's kind of a Zen cone approach, like, I don't know, the lotus leaf is round, 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 rounder than a mirror. You know what I mean? And answer that,
Yeah, that's Michael, you're right. Like, and then sometimes we lose track of that the underneath, the wonder that's underneath that. But if you're in any sort of like enthusiast community, so like I'm very much involved with like and it actually does exist, but the sauna enthusiast community, especially the Finnish type, and people will constantly, it's the argument between the details versus the big picture, and the big picture people who are, and they're both they can both tap into that same wonder or what brings them to the table. But the big picture people will constantly be telling the detail people, you're too focused on the details, you're missing the big picture. And then the detail people will tell the big picture people, you're getting it wrong, these details wrong. And they can both be kind of right, but miss that they're kind of drawing from that same source, the source of wonder.
It was well said. I mean, if you're going to talk about people disparaging the detail people, just at me. Denise, welcome. Let's let Denise talk so PVK will clip me. Did you see you got clipped by the PVK, the Paul Vanderklay? You're becoming famous, but you're muted. So should I unmute you? I can't. Okay. The trees matter, but seeing the forest also matters too. I think my pet peeve is like it's more it's probably more of like a substance ontology leading to a kind of quantitative epistemology, Tower of Babel thing that frustrates me about people that like the focus and the detail. Because it's fine in like the engineering mode. If you want to figure out how to do things in the world, great. But if you're telling me that's how you come to understand meaning, no, you're full of bullshit. That's not how you come to understand.
Well, this is where like purpose comes in. Like, what's the purpose of breaking things down into pieces, or what's the purpose of throwing everything together into a whole? Like, I think there can be bad versions of each.
Yeah,
because
and
you may want to break things down so you can teach it.
yes,
If teaching is the purpose, then all of a sudden you have a telos that's like, well, that's good.
the
Or
problem is we have the whole like Western scholastic academic mode of teaching thinks that you can come to understanding by mechanism, which is why which is why we have the meaning crisis. Like our whole educational system has led us to the meaning crisis. And so that's what I'm fighting against. Because like
Yeah.
that,
Well,
but
Well, I mean,
it's also true that, sorry, I want to affirm this too. It's also true that like just because someone says they're intuitive and they're seeing something that nobody else can see, I mean, you're maybe just delusional though, and you're maybe schizophrenic. Like you're maybe not seeing true things. I mean, that's also valid.
well,
Denise,
and
I don't know how to unmute you. You've muted yourself successfully before I let you in, and now you're just muted.
Before I let you in, and now you're just muted.
I'm sorry. I thought you remuted me.
No.
I didn't know. Well, anyway.
No.
Yeah,
Also
this,
close
I
your
was saying
YouTube.
this is one of my favorite
Also
topics.
close YouTube.
Is everything going well now?
Maybe.
no, there's a
Are we
bad
okay
echo.
now?
Maybe
You need to close the
you
YouTube tab.
need to close the YouTube tab.
Okay, let me just
Listen,
shut this
everyone,
off.
it's worth it.
Totally.
Denise will get all
Listen,
these
everyone, it's worth it.
Hold-
Denise will get all these texts.
Oh, damn it. It's Gemini. That's what's messing it up. Get out of here, Gemini.
Damn you, Gemini.
God,
Damn you, Gemini.
look at this. I'm going to kill the phone. Damn it. It won't even give me the shutting off thing. Gemini has stolen my phone.
This is the best part of the stream so far.
This is the best part of the stream so far.
We
Power
need a
up.
procedure in order to.
We need a
Solve it.
procedure in order to solve
She's
it.
gone. The phone is dead.
Is it
Where
working?
were
now?
we?
Is it working now?
Is
The,
it
the
better now?
tab is on your computer. You need to
We just
close
have
the
the
tab
tab
on your computer.
It's on your computer. You need to close the tab on your
I don't
computer.
have a computer.
Or
I'm
whatever
using an
your-
Android tablet.
Or whatever
You
your
need to close the tab on. Close
Um,
YouTube on
close
the
the tab on close YouTube on the tablet.
I'll try.
It's all we can do.
See, this is where you need the
That's all we can do.
propositional, though. The
See, this is-
propositional's trying to fix this very.
This is where
Do
we need
we have a good tell-off or
professionals trying
not?
to fix this very. Do we have a good tell-us or not?
Denise, just
Well, let's
intuit
just-
it. Intuit
Just
it.
let her. Let's just all be quiet for a minute and let her talk. We'll
Just be quiet for a minute and
Just-
let her
It'll
talk.
echo herself.
We'll
She'll
just
hear
stay
herself.
until she stops. She'll echo herself. There's
Am I here? Hello? I can't hear anything now. Oh, well. I will just talk and then I'll figure out things later. I can't hear anything. Oh, that makes you happy, Luke. I see. All I can read now are facial expressions. This is going to be real intuitive. Which they were talking earlier about children and right, left brain. And one of the interesting things, I don't know how many of you guys, probably the homeschoolers on top of this, are familiar with Piaget. He's the child development expert who wrote during the 40s and 50s. He's French-Swiss guy. And he wrote about all the stages that children go through, which they start very physical. And that's why you can present the same problem to a 2-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a teenager, and they handle the same problem very, very differently. In fact, it's one of the things that really upsets me about today's school system is that the education system is deliberately, in my opinion, sabotaging the child's brain by introducing concepts in kindergarten that belong in adolescence. But anyway, they start out physical. And the child's first task, which you can see very clearly in a toddler learning to walk, is managing the physical world. And then, but they notice that they're very quick to notice body language before they understand it, because that's basic survival. The baby sees the body language of the adults and hides because the adults are reacting to a lion coming into the camp. and they don't have time to explain to the kids. So kids are attuned to body language before verbal language, and then all of the development of verbal language that's so left brain, I think, is also partly, well, not biological evolution, but cultural evolution, because we are now much more dependent on verbal signals than we are about body language signals. So these people that like will say they're intuitive, I don't think a true intuitive goes around telling people they're such, because they're using verbal language to assert something, and it's dominance based, and I have no idea what's going on. Oh, he's hiding his body language. That's what he's doing. I'm sorry. But it's very interesting because the whole left brain, right brain, I got into a whole thing with Grok on this. And Grok goes along with this idea, and you know, I instruct Grok to not pander to what I'm asking, but point out where I'm off base. And we were talking about left and right brain with the Bible, and the Old Testament leans more left, and the New Testament leans more right, which is interesting because if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, the right brain would precede the left brain. The left brain is more like modern civilization. But Jesus apparently was bringing a message to balance the civilization which the Old Testament brings in from Egypt, ancient Egypt. And anyway, I know I'm all over the place. But yeah, it's very confusing to me. But before I go, and I'm going to go now because it's very confusing to be talking into pure silence like this and only seeing these facial antics. but last time I was on, Michael, who is not Michael Sartori, had asked something during the middle of my tech glitches, and he wanted to talk to me, and apparently I just disappeared because I was, you know, having trouble with gremlins in my system here. So if he's out there, get hold of me, you know, and we can talk, whatever it was. It had something to do with something I said as a Catholic, so I have no clue. Anyway, bye. I'm going to mute now.
We back.
I was thinking about how autistic kids always benefit from training or working with dogs and horses. They're like, especially when you're talking about body language and stuff. There's a documentary that keeps coming to mind that I watched. It was a couple in San Francisco, tech people, made great salaries or whatever. They had a son who was autistic, you know, severely so, like antisocial, where like he's not making eye contact, he's not really talking to people. He's they're kind of, you know, they have all the money in the world, they have all the experts they could call, and they worked with all kinds of people. They didn't know what to do. So being Californian tech people, they decided to go see this healer in Mongolia, some like Buddhist healer or something, and so they make this journey, and so part of it was they're gonna trek and camp for weeks to make it to this guy in this remote village. You know, they could take a car, but they decided they're basically riding on horses and stuff. And the transfer, like, so they're filming a lot of this, and the transformation that happens in the kid just from the interaction with the horses was kind of like the takeaway from the documentary. Like so like the journey itself and kind of getting out of the city, getting out into just on the plains, and then riding horses all day, and hanging around a campfire, eating food. So they had a Mongolian guide with him, and he had a little boy around the same age as their son. They're like 10 years old or something. And by the end of the trip, their son was playing with the other little boy, which had never happened before. Like the interaction, like he was actually like interacting and playing and making eye contact. And this was within just a few weeks. And it would be interesting to see what happened like after, once they get back to San Francisco and the experts. But I always liked that documentary. I always thought it was very sort of eye-opening.
Yeah. What's up, guys? Good to see you
What's up,
all.
Alan?
What's up, Jess? Yeah, I mean, I'm such a big believer in, like, based off what you were saying, of just like meeting the children where they are and not forcing them to the higher levels that we want them to be at. Because I see that as such a normal part of like piano, learn the basics, then learn the advanced, algebra 1, algebra 2. Like, I want my kid reading, Charles Dickens by the time he's in second grade. It's just like life is viewed as this thing to be accomplished, which is very like left brain systematizing hierarchy. And then rather than integrating people in like, well, how do they do well? Like, what do they need? How do we not? It's not like these are levels in a video game where it's like, I hugged you 5 years ago. You don't need any more hugs. You know what a hug is. You have that stored memory. Whereas like you need to integrate people and these different experiences. And yeah, like being around an animal that doesn't have language, that doesn't have, put your napkins in your lap, make sure to ask someone about their day, like all these rules that we have that are layered upon layered and just very simple give and take interactions. I think having that is really critical. And, I talk a lot about the summer camp I went to, but just being able to be around other boys and swim and run and play and have games and just very basic interactions where there's no quote unquote school, but like you're learning as much, if not more, than you'd ever learn at school. School is just memorizing lists for the most part. I mean, really, it's just babysitting for kids so that parents can go work at office buildings. But actually learning to teaching kids to integrate themselves with other people and give and take and, those sorts of things can happen in the simplest of ways. Which makes sense why animals would be helpful for people who don't have those skills.
But I think you can get there from a left brain perspective, but maybe because you often hear people say, like in the religious discussions in the deconstruction conversation, is don't stop deconstructing. You just got keep deconstructing, and there at the bottom, you're gonna find the truth that maybe you've missed. So I feel like, in a sense, a left brain propositional perspective could end up with what you've just described, which is to keep asking the question of, like, what's the end point? What's the telos of this education? Is it just information, or is there something, below that or more important than that?
Mm-hmm.
I guess like
it's just Sorry, continue.
No, that's it.
Yeah, I wrote a book on that. I mean, that was kind of like, that was me figuring things out and like trying to go like left brain mode through all of these different kind of like facets of life and try to figure out like, and I did have the benefit, like what Stetson was saying, like my family was very supportive of me. And then like, the church community, it was like, it wasn't the same level, but it was like enough of a thing where I could eventually come to see like, oh, they don't realize like what they're doing, stuff that like hurts people or whatever. And so having that strong foundation, but trying to figure out like what is the ideal way that we're kind of supposed to live, and and I really did figure a lot of that stuff out. I don't know. I guess, maybe there is that way where it's like I always sensed it all along, but I figured it out in the left brain way because that's the only way you can communicate to other people. Like, or not the only way, but it's the only way a lot of communication will be accepted. So So I agree with you, and that's even the thing. I think, yeah, all this stuff can map like both ways. It's just that sometimes we don't want. We're like, there's some things we don't personally we don't want to like deconstruct in that left brain mode. I think sometimes because we fear like, if I take this apart, like, and what if there's nothing there at the bottom? But I think having a relationship with God allows you to do that with less fear, So
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about breaking things into parts is, there's a kind of tension between the non-dual perception and then the concept that no, there's we can start cutting things apart. They called Apostle Paul, like they said, he had a head made of flint. And I always took that to mean that, like, when flint, you do flint knapping to make a really sharp edge. And that's like when you break something, you're going to make it sharper. And it's like the sharpest thing they probably had access to in the ancient world. So in the mind maybe of ancient people, being able to divide something up was a way of grokking it. If I can break it down into its participles or pieces, I can more understand that. But another way to understand something is just to go the other way up the fractal spiral, or through or back, whatever way you want to orient that, is to like, well, how does this participate in the larger thing? And how is that larger thing participating in an even larger thing? Right. And so because this is a part of something too. It's the contextuality that, because God is being in relation, right? Capital B, being, and relation. The only relation worth having is love. And love, the understanding of love is knowing, right? And so there's this, I think like spirit, we have that indivisible part of God in us. That is the spirit element of man that was, on the sixth day breathed in. And so I think that that is like when we say like deep calls to deep, or like that perception that will ground you when you're willing to accept that perception of like God or consciousness beyond, I think, what is the soul is, which is a perishable thing in man, which is not the spirit. And that's like your will towards a telos that creates like a precipitate or a condensate. And that's like who you are, and that's your character, your soul. And that's, your character and your soul is the result of you having a will towards an end, and that will playing itself out, and then you reacting to that, and you applying that will towards everything. To me, that's, and then, the body is obvious. So, spirit, soul, body, there's that sort of formula, ontic perception, or like idea of what a man is. I know some people have like a fivefold, thing that they get from scripture for, the ontic reality of a human person. I'm working with the 3-1. I'm always interested in if, someone's got a better basis. I know some, like William Lane Craig would say it's just 9. Okay. William Lane Craig would say like, no, a person isn't divisible, persons aren't. And I'm like, well, I think that's not precisely true. I think that's helpful for people who want to be infernalists and don't want to. I mean, I used to be freaked out as a kid when I realized, like, wait, God made us, so we're made of parts. How could he ever love a machine that he made that's made of these parts? It used to freak me out as a kid. But then the thing that, kind of thinking about things symbolically is that breath that's actually from God, that's where my universalism comes from. Like, Jesus is offering to save your body and soul, which God will destroy in hell, right? Annihilationism. But the spirit is, since it's part of God, it's not like this. That's why it can return in the smoke, right? That rises into eternity, right? It's not that it's that humans are just, well, if you're good, there's some part of humans that's good. It's like, well, there's some part of God that's good that he lent, and so, and it's the part of like that Jesus is communicating of the God or the Father, which is, I'm actually curious. I've been asking a lot of people this. I'm if anyone wants to answer it, go ahead. I believe that the Father is eternally invisible to everyone except for maybe Christ, and that we'll never see, or like, there'll be an embodied reality in the age to come if you're into that. But I don't think the Father will ever be accessible in any sort of immediate way. I think the Son will be ever present, like as light, first of all, but also that he'll have like a particularization that people will interact with. But I think the Father is forever beyond, forever other. That's what we mean by holy, 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 forever other, beyond even in the highest spiritual places. So that is why the Son is the image for us to understand. And I'm interested in if anyone has any, opinions on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always did think, even where it says that he is the image of the invisible God, that like, okay, well that, when they do the thing where like the paint with the picture, like the old man that's like supposed to be the Father, and it's like, no, like if there was going to be two people that representing God, the Father and Jesus, they would look identical because he's the image of that's the thing that he's the image of. So yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I mean,
like he
that's
says,
the way.
now we know in part, but someday in full.
That's the way I think about it. I think about it that God is always other, and then I think metaphysically. So there's this division between the finite and the infinite, and how those things are in relationship to each other. And that's where the third part of the Trinity is. The third part of the Holy Spirit is the relationship between the Father and the Son. And they're all co-eternal, and they're always dependent and loving one another. And so when we're made in the image of God, we're made in the image of Christ. And he is, we're finite like he is. And actually all of creation in some aspect or another is made in the image of Christ. He is the foundation of everything. So in his finitude, everything finite is made. But then there's the Father who everything is, who's the creator of all things. And so yes, so I which is an interesting thing, because you think about in terms of the fall. When I grew up in my church, and when I understood it as a kid, it was like God and man were together, and then all of a sudden the fall caused this gap that needed to be closed. But if you frame it as the finite and infinite like that, if there is, like, I guess the fall is this breach, like, because the Holy Spirit does close that gap. So there isn't actually a gap until the fall, but that gap is still sort of metaphysically there, if that makes any sense. At least that's how I imagine it. And so then the well, anyway, if anyone has any thoughts.
Well, so
Does that make any sense?
So I would be curious, what's the traditional view on Adam and Eve walking with God in the garden then?
Yeah, so it's like self-consciousness. They were unself-conscious, right? So they weren't aware that they were like maybe a baby is like, it doesn't know it's not its parent. It has its own set of experiences. It's an individual, but it doesn't realize that. So I heard Rabbi Sheikh Tob reference that about the pre-fall state. It's sort of typified by a lack of self consciousness.
So
Yeah, and it's also the knowledge of the good and evil, and the way I kind of imagine it at this point is that one thing that happened was that Adam and Eve questioned whether God was good or not, and took on the role of, in their self-consciousness that arose, they then were able to judge good and evil. But the downside of that is that they could throw into question God's goodness and then be estranged from him. And so there's the goodness of self-consciousness that God brings forth, but then the inherent problem with that, which is that here's a free person independent from myself, who's able to judge good and evil. And now what if that person then looks upon my works and questions my goodness? and God allows this because he's very confident he's going to be able to communicate his love and goodness despite sometimes the appearances of life and how God appears to us sometimes. Sometimes it's terrifying, unfair, traumatic, all that stuff.
But my autistic question is, when they walked with him in the morning, was it physically? Like, did they experience God? Because there was you were talking about, will we ever experience God? How would that be? Did they
Yeah,
experience
they
God?
would have been walking with Christ. That that's
Yeah.
the idea there. They're with Christ because he's the word that made the reality that they're walking in, the embodied place of paradise. And the midrash for this interpretation of self consciousness comes from the story of Noah, where after the mikvah of the earth, the cleansing from the flood, he immediately thinks, "Oh, we're back to the garden. I need to go lose my self consciousness." So he gets himself drunk. Remember, he's like the most righteous man on the earth before and yet he gets drunk, and it's not because he's addicted to alcohol or it's because he's trying to lose his self consciousness to the point where he can be naked and not afraid like they were in the garden. And so, um, not it's about not trusting God. Eve received the inseminating word of the Spirit into her, and it caused her to not trust God. And Adam took, and either that was because of Adam's direction, maybe he didn't clarify, because God told Adam about the tree, and it's assumed that Adam communicated that to Eve, and maybe his mistrust of God was inherent in his communication for whatever is. Am I the one making all that noise? I hear feedback.
Michael's was making some scratching noise. I muted you,
Oh,
Michael.
okay. And so yeah, the self-consciousness causes it's the problem with it is the lack of trust in God, because if you fully trust God, even in this moment, you're very close to paradise already, because nothing that's going to happen to you, it's all just like a story God's telling, and you're like, yeah, if I die or something bad happens, I'm just moving into the next chapter with God. You'll notice that the spirit of fear leaves the more you trust God. And that's what faith is. Faith is just confidence and trust. It's not fancy. It's not believing something without seeing it necessarily. It's just confidence and trust. If you have confidence and trust in God, that's why love always trusts, right? And so God always trusts himself to know that, and within himself, he's always trusting, right? And when we enter into that trust as his bride, we can share in that familial trust that God has within himself. And we can enter into the Shabbat rest that we're meant to as Christians. And so, yeah, I do believe they were walking physically in the garden, but it would have been with the image of God, Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and in that book, Ethics to Beauty, he tells a version of the story of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that they actually see Christ on the cross. And so what he's trying to do in that image is paint the jarring picture of Adam and Eve walking with the Lord in the cool of the day. Then later on, Eve is tempted by the snake to go into the area of the garden they were not supposed to go, to eat of the fruit of the tree they're not supposed to eat. And it's there that they see their Lord crucified. And then, this is, so then this is clearly like, how can this be good? You can see their expulsion from a garden as them even just sort of fleeing from there as a response, because it's basic, it's traumatic, and that's the trauma of the self-consciousness that happens. And that you get this story sort of repeated in the Bible, especially with I'm thinking of Abraham and Isaac. Like, Abraham gets asked to then sacrifice his son, not only his son, but also the promise, everything that God promised him. And Abraham trusts. And, yeah.
yeah. I like so depending on Creation Regained is a really good book. Kind of presents this worldview, but essentially, it's like thinking about this pattern, like the way we're understanding God, because we're always understanding through time and not like in an infinite way. That everything goes through a pattern of like creation, fall, redemption, and not to, and you know, to look at things that way, like not just as like the fall, as in like that one moment, because that is actually like that story. It has a redemption that comes with God, you know, covering their nakedness. And they're brought out of the garden, and the point is not to get back to the garden. God keeps destroying the old version of paradise. So the garden gets destroyed, you know, the world before the flood gets destroyed. He takes Israel out of Egypt, that gets destroyed, like, you know, because it's going towards this final thing, you know, like the new heavens and the new earth. And so like that pattern of redemption is always going on, like through all of history and through our own lives. And like that, and that is really an important part of how we understand God, which really fits with our abilities to understand things, you know, like we've been talking about with our intuitions and our kind of more empirical learning. Like God's communicating through all those different ways. And so, and our understanding of it is always finite, but but as long as we're understanding it, the pattern of that message correctly, then we're understanding the truth. And that's, you know, I think that's get back to what you were saying, Stetson, about like what is like faith is just, you know, it's that just that trust, you know, it's like getting back to the point of realizing our dependency on God. And that's even like, essentially God keeps like raising the stakes for everybody. Like in the garden, it's easy, you know, here's one rule, don't break that one rule. And then everybody after that point, we all know, like, if we could just go back to Eden, we wouldn't mess up that test. And it's like, no duh, you wouldn't mess up that test. That's why you're not getting that test. You're getting a harder test. And like, we're always getting a harder test, and we all fail. So we all have our own like fall. But then, you know, it's realizing that we are not the creator, and, you know, putting our trust back in God that you know, restores us to him. So
Yeah, I always think about this in terms of teaching a kid how to ride a bike. There's at some point you know, you're holding onto the bike and you're letting them pedal and get a feel for it. But there's a point when the training wheels are off, when the father lets go so that the son can become a bike rider. Because when you know how to ride a bike, you can then get around town. You can go ride with your friends. The whole world sort of opens up. But if you always hold on to the bike, they never get to that point. And maybe they're safe. They're safer, sort of, for, you know, but in the long term, it's not safe. But like, you let them go, there's a chance they're going to wreck. But for the father, it's, you know, it hurts for the kid when you take a spill, and then the kid's like, what are you doing to me, Dad? Like, what, like, I do not want to do this. Why are you making me do this? This is terrible, you know, and then take some time to, you know, there could be a loss of trust in that whole process, or the kid jumps back up and is like, let's try again. The father's like, yeah, let's go. You got this. Let's do it. You know, but the goal is, you know, that's how I kind of picture what God's doing with us. Like, and he will let us go at points, at times, in certain ways, in order that we will grow, so that we'll become more than we were. And you know, that's like John Vervaeke's definition of agape is the love that makes people, that makes them grow.
Yeah, and that's even like the thing of, you know, if you're a parent and you're like, I don't want to be the parent, I want to be the cool parent, I want to be friends with my kid, and you try to be friends with your kid instead of being a parent and letting them and recognizing them as a kid, then when they become an adult, they resent you. Whereas it's like, if you be the parent now and recognize that they are a kid, you would eventually will become friends once they become, you know, an adult, and they won't resent you. And it's like,
yeah, but there's always
the
the risk that they'll resent you anyway, no matter what. So that's always like an option available
Eastern
to
Church
them.
speaks of this. They call it theosis.
Yeah.
Just to say that I think that, you know, if we're being grown into be participation as the bride of Christ, like the queen of heaven, you know what I mean? Literally God's spouse, child, and sibling. You know what I mean? What what incredible tests and like be, you know, things that we can't, of course we wouldn't understand what it means to grow into something like that. And at the same time always have like a sneaking suspicion that we knew something about it all along, and that's like, it's not unlike our own development as human beings, you know, in our nature as we are.
Yeah. The yeah, I saw it. I saw Luke doing BMX tricks on his private jet, so he had to get the roof raised on it just so he could do one of the ramps. Um, the I just saw a clip of I guess it was Dave Portnoy, but like obviously very successful guy, you know, and he was just saying how he's doing a pizza review, which are pretty famous, but he's just like, oh yeah, I don't really. He's like, I saw a lot of kids, don't really get the hype around kids, you know, not a big fan, and it just made me laugh because it's like his perspective. Obviously, he's a very accomplished person, and he has this very clear
He's still a
perspective on
kid.
his life, whatever you feel about him, but it's like, you know, it's like all his accomplishments are gonna go away. You know, like his lens is just like my time on this earth, whatever. I probably have 90 years, maybe, let's call it, and I'm gonna accomplish all this stuff, and I am going to, you know, that's my lens on what I am capable of having like influence over. But it's like if you open up your aperture and you look further, it's like having kids is probably the biggest influence you could have on the world, and
Yeah,
actually the most like not, I don't know if control is the right word, but the most, yeah, influence you can have. And so if you actually were like, I want to be closer to God, you would see children and the impact they have. And, you know, not closer just in like, oh, like spiritual closer, but also even if you're like, I just want to change the world, I want to be the most important person ever exist, you'd be way more closer to, way more close to Elon Musk, and, you know, having 1,000 kids or whatever. Um, but then I think even further, you could be Christ-like, and Christ didn't have any children, but his influence on people is like probably the most, you know, he's almost certainly the most influential person to ever live. So he has thousands of spiritual children and millions, obviously billions of spiritual children.
Yeah.
So the idea is just opening that aperture of like, I want to, you know, I want me, and I want this thing for me, and my appetite's to be sated, and I want to accomplish. And it's like, if you just like, even if you leaned into saying, I just want to be successful, it's like you would point you toward greater goals than just like, I want to run Barstool Sports.
yeah. He just
Yeah.
spends all all the time focusing on sports and eating cheese pizza. So when he looks at kids, he just sees a reflection of himself that he doesn't like, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, opening up the aperture, meaning and context are sort of the same. You know, they're two sides of the same coin. There, it's if, you know, if I see a quote, it's like, oh, that's a terrible quote, but I don't realize that it's inside of a paragraph that's trying to show me why that quote is wrong, and it's going to offer me insight better than what I already know. But really, that's actually in a book that, you know, is doing something even larger, right? So like, yeah, if your aperture is too small, your access to meaning, your salient structure is going to, you know, be inherently limited.
Yeah.
And yeah, Christ, of course, was a parent. He gave birth to his church out of his side. The water broke and the blood poured out and the Spirit
Yeah.
descended. You know.
Yeah. But yeah, no, and that's quotes always make me laugh because like so much of the meaning of a quote is by who they attribute it to, you know, and that's why there's so many falsely attributed quotes, because it's like the words don't actually mean anything by themselves. But oh, if Winston Churchill said that, well, he probably said that when he was thinking about killing Hitler, and he probably, oh my gosh, and it's so meaningful. But you never hear like, oh, this famous quote, to fight with honor is to be a glorified in life. And then it's like, oh, who said that? It's like, oh, Dave, my mailman. You'd be like, oh, well, I don't really, I'm never going to say that again. But if
Yeah.
you said, oh, it was said by, it was said by George Washington, you'd be like, oh yeah, he was probably fighting the redcoats and he thought of this great meaningful quote. But it totally is, we think the meaning is just in the words, but who said it and the context they said it in, and the context goes infinitely deep as well. And all context is, related. All things are related. So
Is it important that we love it or learn how to love it before we love it?
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. For some,
Well, there's
sometimes that's how it is.
the G.K. Chesterton quote about Rome wasn't loved because she was great. Rome was great because she was loved. About people
Yeah,
having a unified desire, then create something that's worth loving.
yeah. I think like you learn how to love something from someone who loves something.
Well, yeah. I think maybe it's just when you do like the learning process, if you can just maybe think about like God being involved with it, it's like there's so many things that like initially strike me as like weird. I don't understand it. Maybe it's like something frightening or it makes me feel uncomfortable. But then when I try to learn to understand it, I usually do end up loving it, or like, as far as especially like if it's a person or something, which, it's like, I don't know, I guess it's just maybe your empathy grows the more you learn about like the people that make you feel a certain way that maybe you don't like. If you lean into that, there's probably, and it is usually something about like, oh, the thing that I didn't like about that person was something that I didn't want to face in my own life. And then you kind of have compassion
Yeah.
on them. So,
Well, just I get, yeah, to tag on to that, Michael, is I guess like also you need to uh like I feel like sometimes that's weaponized though, and I'm not saying you're saying that, but like it's like, oh well, if you just knew more and da da da, you need more empathy, more empathy. But it's like sometimes opening the aperture, you realize someone's way worse than you think they were. And I think
yeah.
sometimes we use that as like, oh, we're just gonna get this Buddhist spiritual understanding and nothing really matters. So everyone's really, if I can just imagine them as a baby, then I would have empathy for everyone. And I'm not saying that's inherently like I'll never do that. But sometimes I'm like, when you open the aperture, it's like, oh, this person's a lot more damaging. Like they'd say, like, well, I can take it, and this person's really disrupting my classroom, but it's okay. And I imagine them as a 5-year-old. But if you really look around, you think, well, I have 20 students in my classroom. It's disturbing it for all 20. This kid is, maybe you don't hate them or have an emotional reaction, but you actually start thinking when you open the aperture and you think, well, this guy sucks because he's ruining it, not just my day, but he's ruining 20 people's days. And, I actually have to be like harsher with this person. And
Yeah. Well, I think, yes, and there can be people, like, not to say in an eternal sense, but that are like functionally irredeemable as far as like their presence in society. But even still through that process, it's to see like you're going to end up pitying them more than you're going to end up hating them as you learn to understand them more. And so,
well, yeah, and it's not about
well, because it's just the thing of like, there's that whenever you get into that cycle of like the problem is that person or that type of person, and if we just got rid of them, we wouldn't have a problem. That's on the wrong track. Yeah, but
yeah, no. I totally get that. I just think that like I don't know. Yeah, what you're saying is true. I just think that sometimes all sort of like you get into this like muck
yeah,
of
everything
just
gets
like
weaponized.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not saying you're purposely weaponizing it, but just like really dealing, yeah, getting past your anger, bitterness towards someone is great, but also it'll like move you towards like, Jesus criticizing the Pharisees was done with love, and it's just like that, sometimes it looks in a way that I think our culture doesn't talk about of like actually taking having the kid who's disrupting the classroom and taking him outside and being like, yeah, like you have to sit in the principal's office for 2 hours. Might suck, but you're like, well, that's actually the most loving thing I could do. I don't know. I guess it doesn't always look the way people think it'll look, which is like the
Oh
kumbaya,
yeah,
like
yeah,
we're all one. It's all just like a stew. It's all just a soup with like, you know, it's all just a mush, like we're all just floating away. We're all just whatever. Um,
yeah. Sometimes
so
you just have to like stay completely. Like you can be like, I love that person. I forgive them. I can never spend another day in their presence. and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like
yeah.
an okay thing.
Yeah.
Well,
'Cause I
yeah, every parent and everyone that's part of like a recovery program knows that love isn't just niceness.
Yeah. No, and it definitely is true. I just think that opening the aperture, like, it'll change your perspective on everyone, and it's not just the people you dislike, it's the people you like, it's all the things, and yeah, send help. I'm actually on vacation right now, so, I just had to get away from it all, except for the TLC. That's the one thing I was like, "I can't get away from it." Uh But yeah. I mean, I think we're on the same page. I just like I think the opening up the aperture just turns into this like just like empathy that precludes any action or can do that into just like, oh, just like nothing. Everything's the same. So, the butterfly is the same as the arsonist who's burning down the school and, all these things, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
and that's why you need the right brain thing and the left brain thing,
Yeah.
and the fact is like, and I mean that's even to say like, obviously the kind of universalist appeal is to be like everything will be redeemed eventually, and
hmm
then but but like, well, I don't know, I can't see everything, so I guess if some stuff just ends up in the trash at the end of the day, it's okay. It's not my call. But I have to be very careful about like deciding that people that I know and spend time with are like definitely going to hell or whatever. Like that, I can't make that call either. So it's yeah, it's a balancing act a little bit.
Yeah. I guess like in some ways it's also more like scary. It's like, you get past not scary, but you get past the like, oh, I hit that person's going to hell because they're so annoying, and my boss is going to hell because he made me work over the weekend. Like, there's that, like, type of like, oh, it's so bad, and then there's like the like, oh yeah, I'm going to hell because I'm a bad person. Like, like, oh, I now get it, and then you actually like really dig in. It's not like, oh, I'm not condemning myself to hell because I'm like hate myself. I'm doing it because I'm like, oh, now I've opened the aperture and being like, things that are apart from God can't dwell with God eternally. So, they have to be destroyed. So it's like, oh no, I'm not doing that because I'm like angry and bitter at myself. I'm doing it because I'm like, now I understand the fuller context. And that fuller context is now drawing to conclusions where I'm like, I'm not sure I like this conclusion. But it's not done with some like malicious like, like the guy who that waitress who got my order wrong is going to hell, and the guy who bumped him into me in line is going to hell. It's this other form of like, wow, like they're now that I see the picture fuller, there's all these like consequences, and understanding why those are true uh is important, and comes from like that wider lens, not just the emotionalism.
Yeah,
You're not an infernalist, are you?
Yeah, I probably am.
Oh no, I'm just kidding. I don't even know what I am these days.
I mean, I think they're bringing hell to earth in the same way we can bring the kingdom of God to earth. So when you do worthless things, like they literally have zero worth, you're participating with the void. You're bringing that pattern to bear in the reality around you, and so you're that, and that will be destroyed. Of course, it's inherently worthless. You just can't see it yet. So,
Mhm.
I mean, in some ways, I can agree with that from my perspective. My weird, I don't know, harmonized annihilationism / universal reconciliation. But I know that it's not malicious. I also know that the empathy thing, knowing and loving and knowing being the same, means that like God is love, God is knowing, God is being knowing, and he's knowing the best, he's relating in the best way, which is love, and that relating requires ultimate knowledge. So yeah, if like you have to know someone well to be able to be like, yeah, this is not, you're participating in the void right now. This isn't what is integral to who God has for you to be, and you're instead bringing in something that's utterly worthless, because it's participating with nothing, or it is the participation of nothing, Although I do think it's strange that Christ's glorified body, at least before he presented it to the Father, still had the holes. Like, there's something about what was referenced earlier with like Christ being on the tree of paradise. There's something about the participation of the void that God uses towards his glory that I find very mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what was that last part? Something about the void?
Yeah, participation with the void is something that God uses towards his glory, like when he brings the creation into the void, like the blank canvas of it all. I find that very mysterious that God, because there's a sense in which, like,
This is
your
my
memories,
jam. I love this.
your memories in heaven, right? If God's, the cross, first of all, is the most ironic symbol of all. That's the devil's art trying to make the most blasphemous symbol he could possibly imagine, and also like prophecy goading him into creating it, and then the irony that it's actually the most beautiful so far, and so when I say like God loves irony, there's a sense in which, like, whenever I find myself in the narrative of my life realizing that, like, oh wow, this is incredibly ironic, I've just said something that points to everything, and it's like it's undoing me and redoing me, you know what I mean? It's that's what we mean by turning around and repenting, in some sense. It's sort of like the cross, the intersection of heaven and earth, where you become hyperbolic, and this grokking, this hyperbolic, what was I calling it, qualia, as it becomes apparent to you, because the aperture opens up, and new things come into focus, and your ability to understand grows because of the context. More light is let in. I don't know. I'm just trying to do the symbols here, guys.
Yeah, I'm trying to track with you. Jess, I got a quick question. Were you lurking in the background and highlighting your own comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Just checking. I like it.
Who else is gonna highlight them?
Yeah, you left it up there for a while. I was like, is he doing this right now? No, I'm glad you brought up the void thing, though. I feel like that gets back to what Luke was talking about with the donut, whatever, the torus. Like that center, the bow tie thing is the void.
The chiasm?
Yeah, something like that. So how does that relate to math, Risto? Because you were relating it to math earlier.
Which, you have to refresh my memory. Which aspect of math? There's a lot of math.
Yeah,
a lot of math.
And I'm not a mathematician, so I don't really know. But this stuff interests me. But even with the ideas around math, there always seems to be an uncertainty within it when you get into things like, because you immediately get into like imaginary numbers and things like that. And so there is kind of this, I don't know if that's the void aspect of it, or this some weird sort of uncertainty or darkness you have to like, that is kind of weirdly embedded in math.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, math. I mean, math is super interesting. I mentioned already that we homeschool our kids. And in that process, like, I always liked math. I did well at math in school. I minored in it just for kicks and giggles in college. But so I was always like, I'm a math person. But then once I started teaching my kids, I realized I didn't understand it. There was no telos to that math or understanding below it. So yeah, I mean, there's a trick that you can do if you take a circle. You can do this with a tortilla. To figure out the area of a circle, you can
some homeschooled stuff right here.
You can divide. It's a Waldorf thing, but you can divide a circle in half, and then like in quarters. And you can take those pies and then arrange them in such a way. But then if you cut each of those pieces into half, also, again, this is kind of like what Luke was talking about. Like, you get smaller and smaller pieces of the pies, and you start arranging them kind of in alternating. I need like a picture of this, but alternating segments with the point down, the point up. It approaches the area of a rectangle, and so then that's how you can figure out how to figure out the area of a circle, like on your own. But it requires a trick of, you'd have to do it an infinite number of times to actually have it work. And you can't, it's my understanding, again, as someone who really doesn't understand math, that that well, is that you can't actually have an infinite in that way. So math kind of like works on this, like, well, if you just do it an infinite number of times, I think that's what Luke was saying with his calculus. But as far as I understand the math people, you can't actually do that.
So that's where people get into a thing of like, we can never say precisely what the area of a tortilla is, and therefore we can never know if God is real or something. And it's like, well, no, because you can know it's less than this amount and more than that and that amount. Like it's not as uncertain as you're making it out to be. So that's kind of the two sides of the brain thing working again.
This kind of reminds me of. Oh, go ahead. Please go.
Well, just if you squint your eyes, it's a rectangle.
Yeah.
Well, if you see through a veil darkly, it's a rectangle. Yeah, I mean, because you get the same effect, you know. It reminds me of, Digital Gnosis, Nate's deal, his criticism of intelligent design is based on like, well, I can imagine an infinite series of other ways it could be, and so it's absurd that it's this way. And I'm like, that's logically the case for any right answer that the question doesn't limit the series of possibility, in the question. There are an infinite series of wrong answers to something. So to demonstrate that you can multiply problems is kind of unimpressive. So it's, I often notice that when someone is trying to make a mountain out of a molehill and problematize something, they'll start multiplying problems this way, through the imaginal. And while that is a sort of useful tool sometimes to use the imaginal to try and guess at likely problems, to say that, well, I can come up with an infinite set of maybe not likely problems, but possible problems. It's like, that's not impressive. That's the case with almost everything. If you frame it in such a way as a question or whatever, and with answers.
Well, maybe that's where people get wary of the left brain, is it's like, that's how it's often used. I've used it that way, but it's like precision for thee, but not for me. Like I use that precision as the scalpel as a tool against you to show, I mean, I see this with my kids all the time, right? To show where you're precisely wrong, but I want flexibility and nuance. And so often that precision is the corrective tool. And that's not a bad thing, actually. Like it is good to have that precision as a corrective tool, but it's also the weapon. And we all experience that a lot of someone, but actuallying us.
Yeah, it was.
I
a
think
big
that's
part.
kind of what God is doing to Job at the end of Book of Job.
Well, I think
Same
an
one.
interesting thing with with Job or any of the other narratives, like this is something I did a lot with, because people would say like, oh well, obviously like God is a monster because look at like this, and like they just will throw out these things of like it shouldn't have gone that way, and like I really have tried to think like really hard about a lot of these stories in the Bible. I mean, especially with those things where it's like, why did he do it that way? And you try to think of like what if he had done the opposite thing? What if it had gone the other way? And you're pretty soon you're gonna figure out like, oh well, then you would have hit this other roadblock or whatever. And then you start realizing like, oh, actually, like the way God did things was kind of like seems like the smartest way that I can think of. Like, just even as far as like making a story work together, like, and so that's to say like, oh no, can I explore that infinitely? No, but it gives me like a confidence that it's better to trust this source rather than the lack of alternatives that are being presented. And it's like, well, yeah, I have way more problems with a lot of the other explanatory stories of life than the biblical one.
So you cut up the tortilla small enough that you're able to say, yeah, looks like a rectangle.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an appeal to the void that people are doing when you rely on the negation, right? The principle of negation to try and prove something. Like, well, I can negate it in an infinite series of possibilities. And so why you have a 1 in an infinite chance of being right? I have, one less than an infinite in a chance of proving you wrong. You know what I mean? And that is to say, I'm opening it up to the tohu bohu, the hot whip chaos of every possible, an infinite series of negative possibilities. And so I think, but that is actually kind of a useful tool. I think we use that. That's sort of like dividing by zero or something, like you can use it to, again, it has its utility. The both sides here they've got their, otherwise, obviously they're serving together, but I think maybe the left brain is a representation of the participation of the void that is inherent in the creation and reality that we exist in. I don't know.
Well, you have to have the void, right? Because otherwise you don't have a womb, and it just becomes a monad or something. So you have to have some sort of participation with it.
Unitarians are triggered right now.
Wait, why?
You said the monad, and sorry, I was just.
Oh. Well, like even just the I'm still trying to wrap my head around the tortilla thing. Actually, so the completeness or the correct answer, I guess you would say, to get to the correct answer includes the infinite, is what you're saying.
Yeah, except for it never gets you there.
Yeah, it would account for the void. So it's something like including the womb or potentiality or something. Like it always has
Well, it's kind of like what Michael was saying. What he was talking about. What he does with the difficult passages in Scripture, where you actually zoom in with the microscope, right, and you look and you consider. You rearrange and you consider, how would it have been if God did this or that, or and then it starts to look like, oh, okay, I kind of see how that makes sense, but it's not like an ironclad proof. And then, that's also kind of where people try and get you, like, oh, you can't completely certainly say that, so then you can't say that. So technically speaking, the tortilla never gets you to the area of the circle unless you do kind of like what Michael is doing, which is like, okay, yeah, I think that works, and then you go with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, and even that's to say, yes, you can definitely figure out the area of the tortilla within a range of possibilities, and it's more than this amount and less than that amount. So it's not like, and that's, because that's kind of like pushing back on like the postmodernist thing, like, oh, like everything, everything's like, everybody's got their own way of looking at things, so nothing is absolute. And it's like, yeah, but there's a range where you're trying to, you're fooling yourself if you're trying, like, there's something like, there's some approximation of like good and evil, right and wrong, even if we mess it up sometimes. It's not complete mush.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about actual infinites. I mean, there's a conversation about Hilbert's Hotel and Hercules making it across the arena that, I don't know that we even really want to have here. But, there's,
well,
yeah.
there's I like the reason I think it's necessary. We have to have the infinite because we also have to have the void, which is something I've been, who was I talking to about it recently? I know I was talking to Luke and Cal about it a while back, but just about like things like oblivion and absolute like nothingness. Because if you have an infinite of something, it's kind of like having nothing. Because if it's the uncountable, it's kind of the same thing. Like you can't juggle it. It's kind of like the same thing. They both almost seem like opposites, but they're kind of the same if you're having to wrestle with them. And so
almost non-dual.
Yeah. And so, but just that I don't know that I've been trying to think like if there actually is a Christianity that I've seen or a religion that I've seen that has really, really wrestled with oblivion to that degree. And I don't know that anybody actually can, because I don't know that we can really, like you're even talking about the infinite, I don't know that we can actually comprehend what that actually is.
Yeah, you can't. And no thingness either. Yeah, you can't comprehend no thingness. It's not a thing. It can't be comprehended. And that in the same way that God's holy and that he doesn't have thingness like that. You know what I mean? He's outside of that kind of thingness, at least in some imaginations.
There is less of a fear, at least in myself, that is around the infinite, though, rather than nothingness. Because if you think about just nothingness, there's this weird sort of like blackness and darkness forever, or some sort of kind of fear that is there, but
complete void.
Yeah. So
you say you fear the infinite more than the nothing?
No, less. Because infinite almost sounds like further up and further in or something, but nothingness just sounds like okay, like just absolute nihilism or something, you know, and which I think is maybe what you were talking about with Job, just that he was having to encounter that more or something and deal with that.
I think trusting God is how we deal with the infinite. That's what it means to trust. I mean, you're trusting in the infinite, the unknowable. It's the non-dual, no thingness infinite. Because if, like, say you died and you had an experience and God spoke to you, you know, in a way that you understood. It's like, all right, I'm going to put you in heaven now. And so you're in heaven. It's a great time. You know, it's just what, you know, everything you've always wanted. But maybe you never trusted God. You're like, well, he said that, and I'll see how this goes before I decide. Am I really in heaven, or am I being tricked? Did I die, and it's a multiverse, and now I'm in another universe with like an evil pseudo god or whatever? And so the whole time, you know, a year goes by, and you're like, well, this has been really good. Maybe I should trust. I don't know. He hasn't been back. I haven't, you know. I don't really understand what he's doing over there. There's a lot of weird colors and characters, and I don't know if I can't tell if I like them or I don't. I mean, it's not negative, but I'm not sure. After 10 million years of this level of pleasure, it would dawn on you at some point that 10 million years of the worst things imaginable in the opposite direction could be awaiting you in the next moment, which is why you can't access heaven without trusting God. You could be in heaven and not be in heaven if you didn't trust God, because you wouldn't be participating in love, which always trusts, which is to participate in God himself, right? And that's to know that you can trust, because loving is knowing that you can trust.
Yeah, I think most of life is learning how to trust despite appearances, and it's specifically like the difficulty of it at times that then will make it, hopefully make you able to trust him. Because I mean, I think when you fundamentally get down to it, there are no assurances. You can't calculate everything. You can't get to the root of anything, but basically you're left with some options of taking a stance, and the Christian one is faith, hope, and love. And so you can as a finite being, you can make that stance through, and God says, I'll give you the power and the ability to do that, to stand as someone who has faith, hope, and love, if you want to grow in that direction. He'll make that possible for you. But you know, we shy away from that all the time, and that's not necessarily a problem for God, but it just draws things out longer. Because I mean, it's nice knowing things. It's nice having stuff you can count on and having a world beneath your feet, but you can't necessarily calculate it all and know anything for sure. Your knowledge is fleeting, and everything's sort of vacuous if you analyze it enough. But can you trust in the infinite? Can you trust in God?
Which that can be helpful, right? That's where I say, you know, like where people say keep deconstructing, is if you keep just deconstructing and your foundational beliefs are in science or philosophy, at the bottom of each one of those, they're going to tell you we can't know for sure. So, and that can be helpful. That could be the continuation of, you could say, well, is that all there is? We can't know for sure. Or you ask the next question, is there a knowing beyond that? You know, can I actually, like Luke was talking about, could I actually walk to that person? Even though in my head, I know I can't half the distance and ever get there, but could I actually do it? You know, the action, experience, the heart state. But still, So then it kind of, I think those things are more fundamental. Then there's a tendency to dismiss the left brain analytical side of things, but we can't do that. Like the Proverbs comes to my mind. It says like a fool believes. Oh, what does it say? Now I'm forgetting the proverb.
There's lots of things.
It's like a fool believes anything or something like that.
Sounds
Well,
right.
one thing is that's important to remember, and I know like John Vervaeke's been talking about this, is that like they've done studies now, and it's like when people think that the basis of their like thought system or whatever is like science instead of religion or whatever, they still get to that baseline by faith, by trust, essentially, and that what really formats your and it's predictable. He says it's people will believe what the credible people in their life believe, like as you're growing up. And so if your parents are faithful, whether they're Christians or atheists or some other religion, if they're faithful people, you are pretty much going to tend to go along with them if they live with integrity. If they are not, like if they're hypocrites, then you will probably end up searching out somebody who's more credible than them, and you will believe whatever they believe, which is a lot of times probably the opposite. So, and I think that in that way, and that is like, but in either way, the basis is that more intuitive way, but it's almost like the left side or whatever, that's what you need for handling the cognitive dissonance of whatever it is. And so, I think the big takeaway is obviously like to try to be someone who lives with integrity, and that's the biggest thing. If whatever you say, it doesn't matter if it doesn't match like the way that you live and you act.
Oh shit.
Clip it.
Flip it.
So you said the word vacuous earlier when reference to the void, and it made me wonder: is the void inherently erotic because of its draw? It's in the way I wrote a poem once that said like, "Dirty page, you slay me. Get blank and see what happens." And it's you know what I mean. So it's like there's this idea of like when there's potentiality there, if there's if there's a vision, right, an artistic vision, and something to incarnate a world. It's not only. Oh, okay. Is there something that God sees in potentiality that is within him that to express, to push out, right? God is expressing himself unto himself, like I'm working through the participation of the void in the divine, and I don't, I mean, maybe it's a mystery at the top and the bottom of all of God's play, and so maybe it's never to be answered, and that's fine, but I am curious, but I think maybe the curiosity is the interesting and okay part.
Yeah, well, there's something God kind of provokes that thought in his speech in Job, where he says, "Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth?" So it's like, what is all of creation built on? And then he like even goes a level deeper. He's like, on what were the pillars? So they're the pillars that are under the foundation. He's like, what were those set on? And so this is
Now
not
he's
only
just making stuff up.
right. He's like, but it, the poetics of that are pretty striking, because he's like it's like, what's the base level thing, then what's that underneath it, and then what are those sitting on, that kind of thing, because Job earlier in his speeches talks about God hanging everything in the void. Everything's hung up in surrounded by nothingness, and then God in his provocation asks him what everything's set. So like within the question, to go beyond, to go deeper is also a assertion that something's sitting on top something's sitting on something, and it's not just void. So it's like a rebuke of his phrasing that things were in a void, but also like it's a little bit, it's the thing behind the thing behind the thing.
Just God sounds like a flat earther or something.
Everything that came to exist has a cause. Premise 1. Premise 2. Yeah, that's God. Yeah, showing I think perhaps, he's showing the limits to Job's knowledge, but then extending that even further, right? He's deconstructing Job even further with, I think, the purpose of, you see this, I think you see this with a lot of people who deconstruct very far, just listening to their stories, as they come to a place of trust, of being satisfied with the manna. And that's a big problem. As you get older and you experience life a bunch, you realize that, like, a lot of my problems are rooted in not being satisfied, and then God saying, be satisfied with me.
Mm-hmm.
The trust thing kind of, I don't know. I don't even know if I have very words. I guess it just kind of gets me, because you guys keep saying that and talking about having peace and rest in that trust. That's what I mean. There seems to be there always there. I feel like there's a limit to it, or it feels like there is, because even listening to most people talk about, I know this is just going to open up another can of worms, but AI and everything, and like that, and then them talking about it becoming conscious, then the possibility of humanity becoming extinct. It's like, is there a trust in the extinction, in the absolute nothingness? Like, with things like that, like, what if consciousness as we know it, humanity, all of humanity's consciousness, were just to just be extinct? Like, is there still a trust? Is there still a God there? Like, is there still a shalom or peace in that? Because I guess that's what I meant by the infinite and nothingness not being much different, because you can have infinite light and then you can just be totally lost and forgotten in that, because nothing's identifiable. So, like, how could you, if you're thrown in an infinite number of people, you get lost or forgotten or something, and then to go the other way, absolute darkness.
Forgotten's the key word.
Yeah.
Like,
Is there a trust in that? That's what's,
well, we're worried
scary.
about being forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, is because when we die, like, we're not in control of anything. We don't have, like, your beliefs won't help you. Even your, like, whatever stance you take, like stance of faith, hope, and love, like that's all gone. You don't have that stance. You're not there anymore. You're dead.
Yeah.
But what we hope in is in the memory of God, that God remembers us, and and we're really scared of being forgotten, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
And
that's
then,
why I wonder if
part of it is a reminder of the capacity of God to remember, and how deep and wide that is.
Not only to remember, but to re-embody us. Remember, embody. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. This is where the hope of the resurrection is for me.
Yeah.
Like, I see it sort of in that.
Well, and trust as an action, trust as the, walking across the room to that other person.
It's a procedure too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of knowing, right? When I trust in something, I'm testing it. It's a hypothesis. I think I can trust that. Can I? Let's test it. Great. Well, I need to repeat that test over and over, because we're, that's science, in some very, low, high sense, low sense, doesn't matter. It's in, so I think, it is frames all the way down. It's the premises all the way down, and so you don't want to vacate the premises, but you will just find yourself in some sort of mathematical larger resolution or smaller resolution of the same premises, if the fractal nature of reality is true, which it seems true from the book of nature and in the text. There's fractal chiasms, which is like the bow tie structure, but it's a poetic structure: A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A. And if in the center there is where the treasure is when you're reading the text. And if you, I frankly think that, one of the things that upped my trust in the text was the incredible complexity of the work when you look at it in the original Hebrew. Gematria aside, we don't even have to go there. I'm not a big gematria guy, but I know some people who are. And so anytime I start talking about these kinds of structures, they're like, yes, let's get to the gematria. There's some, but there's, as a poet, like looking at that, it's like, oh man, I'm always trying to write these really cool encoded, hyperlinked, hyperbolic things, that just invite people to keep asking questions about what this poem could possibly mean. And I just try, I try and participate. All good art is just stealing God's art. And so I'm like, well, how could I embed nearly infinite meaning in this and have it all be intentional? How can I intend every possible, likely interpretation of this work to be true? And so, I think, if you're going to trust, you learn to trust, like, okay, I can trust that if I seek, I'll find, essentially. And seeking and finding is like perhaps the glory basis of time itself, because if everything's already found, there's no seeking, and seeking's fun. Dopamine.
Well, and I think there's also a kind of trust, which is I stop cutting the tortilla. I stop cutting it and I am satisfied with the answer, pi r squared, and I eat the tortilla, and then it's like, well, what does that mean? Like the picture in the Exodus is they gather the manna, they eat the manna. There's a resting in, like, I don't need a different thing, another thing. There's a sufficiency. What is it? The song at Passover. I don't know if you've ever heard this, Daye Nu. I've been to one Passover before, one Seder, which is, it would have been enough, and they just keep singing over and over. It would have been enough. That would have been enough. But there's like, but I'm dissatisfied. I'm not sure if it is enough. The question is God enough? That's the big question. And that's, that's the big question of faith.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, there is, like, I agree with everything you said. Like, there is that satisfaction. Is there still the trust in him using your dissatisfaction? So, like, I would say, like, like a simple example, well, let's just use a kid riding a bike. The kid doesn't know how to ride a bike. The father specifically provokes the son to be dissatisfied with his not knowing how to ride, and in order to get him to be able to go out and practice riding the bike. And so this, God uses the desires to accomplish his purposes in this way. And so even there is the nurturing, satisfied, comforted state, but there's also the provoked, the pushed, the agitated state that God will use for your good, or for this. I mean, this is when it gets complicated, because sometimes he will do that to you and it actually doesn't help you. It hurts you, but it helps others. And so this is this self-sacrificial thing that you become, however God sees fit to use you. So you end up, suffering, and it doesn't necessarily benefit you in one way, but it helped, like, all of a sudden through your suffering, let's say you dealt with a learning disability, but because you struggled through all that learning disability, you're actually able to help other people deal with that learning disability, and they don't have to struggle like you did. So, like, you struggled, and sure, you made it through, whatever, but the real goal was to help these other people. But then there's the glory, and this is another thing God promises, is that you become glorified because of that, because of what you suffer, because of the ways he's agitated you. So that glory ends up becoming something that actually is for your benefit, but it's not necessarily like a straightforward sort of thing. You're like, oh, God put me in this tough situation so I could grow stronger. Sometimes maybe he'll put you in a tough situation, you actually break down and you don't become stronger, but because of that, yeah.
Well, I think I think it's probably like one of the most interesting things that Peterson ever said that I've thought about a lot is his connection where he talks about like God put in the curse on the woman's womb, and he says it's the the evolutionary arms race between the size of the baby's head and the woman's hips, and that it puts it in this situation where like the human baby is like the most pathetic and vulnerable creature on this planet. It needs the absolute most amount of like attention to survive. And it's interesting because he does that like for one thing, that shapes how we experience our own life. We're not really conscious of it, maybe, but well, for one thing, all of our ancestors are the ones that did receive an enormous amount of nurture, like more, because the ones that didn't die, and they're not our ancestors. So that's like, in a way, it's like the survival of the fittest is the survival of those who receive compassion, who are related to the ones who give compassion. But on the other hand of it, it's like thinking about that as like, oh, this is part of the solution to the problem of what happened in Eden, is that God says, okay, I'm going to tie this little helpless baby to you, and you're going to be like totally handicapped by having to deal with this thing, and then you're going to start to understand like something about your relationship to me through that process. And so it's like, yeah, trust is so like woven into everything, and it really is so much. I guess the story is more like what we do about the fact that it gets unlearned, or not everybody gets it developed to the same extent, like whatever the ideal amount of like love and nurture a child should receive. Not everybody is so fortunate, but then so much of that trust gets eroded by like just the difficulties of life and people's cruelty. But yeah, but God turns all those things, like he redeems them when you take that on as like, I didn't like the way I was treated by people, so I'm going to treat people in a better way. I don't want somebody else to suffer that same way.
Well, and we complicate things. We pick from that other tree. We try other things. I'm a huge complicator in the whole thing. I just sat next to my grandfather as he was dying a couple months ago, and I'd seen his whole life, and his favorite song was the hymn "Trust and Obey." It's just like super simplistic, but I watched him live his life that way. He would be bored out of his mind to listen to this conversation, but it's that integrity, and he lived it out, and he did trust. He didn't overcomplicate things. So, but sometimes it is, Jess, you mentioned like, I think God does, he understands that. I don't think he expected, I think he brought Israel out into the desert and gave them this little sweet bread from the sky, knowing that it was going to provoke issues. Like they needed to learn some lessons as they came out of Egypt. They weren't ready, and that it was going to be a mess. And thankfully, he worked with them and was patient with them.
Well, yeah, and that's another thing where it's like, it was the lack of trust of that first generation that could not be taken into the promised land. So it's like you had to start from scratch with a generation that never knew Egypt. All they knew was wilderness, because because essentially it's like their parents' generation was like, yeah, maybe that promised land's better than Egypt, but we gotta like do all this work to get in the land. Is that worth it? Like, their trust had been lowered, I guess you'd say, or it hadn't been built up sufficiently, even despite all the the things that they went through. But that other, like, I don't know, it's weird, like, because that's even to say, like, there's obviously problems with the thing of like faith as just like believing stuff, like you know, like if you can like believe it. But there is something to the fact that I think that God can do something through someone who's like has that innocent naivety that he can't do the same exact things through somebody who has, you know, experienced all of the bumps and bruises of trying to you know, go through life even doing the right thing. Because, you know, I mean, that's even the thing to say, like, there's a lot of times where I think, and I think this is even the case, like, I was doing what God asked me to do. I was doing what he wanted me to do, but it didn't have a good result. It had a bad result because it's like he wanted me to be the guy that somebody else shouts at so that he could do something in that person's life like later on, you know? And it's like that wasn't good for my confidence, but it's, you know, it's a part of God's plan. So but yeah, you know, that's what you get with like the new believers that just go and like they're just sharing the gospel with everybody and like all this like crazy stuff's happening. It's like God's free to move in their ignorance in a way that he's not always able
And
to
sometimes
do
he'll
in
use
some
that to
lives.
provoke you to to in your relationship with him back again.
Yeah.
Well, he's growing your capacity. Oh, go ahead.
I gotta run. So
Hey, see you.
Rest him.
I'm gonna shut this down in probably like 7 minutes. Like,
All right.
Okay.
I just want to say that, yeah, he's using that to grow your capacity to have relation with him, which is which is the theosis of it all, the sanctification of it all, is to draw you into his family and into his likeness. And you know, the participation of the void and we were talking about the chiasm, the bow tie, the procession and regression or whatever of the infinite towards the absolute nothing or the infinite nothing. It reminded me of like a horizon, right? Because you have a center point and then you have, you know, the bottom part is like the road going towards you and the other one is like the sky expanding out in front. And then if you think about the temple or the tabernacle and the sacrifices and the smoke rising up, that creates the intersection of heaven and earth, right? The meeting of the infinite and the voids and possibilities, right? Across an event horizon that, you know, it is to say like, hey, I'm bridging that gap. You know, I'm coming down to have a barbecue with you and to give you the trust that you lack through demonstration, through participation, and, you know, and maybe perspectival knowing, you know, in some sense. I you know, I think that's all I was going to say. So I'm going to stop. I'm at that.
any closing thoughts, Michael?
No, it's a fun conversation.
This was fun.
Yeah.
Good one. I had a good time.
A lot of my favorite things. Yeah, it was good to meet you, Stetson. I haven't talked to you before.
Yeah, it's good to meet you guys too. Yeah, I've you know, just recently kind of come out of work, so I'm just trying to put my face around here. So my skin is, you know, in the game, as it were. So
Cool.
All right. Well, I guess we can close it down here. It was good chatting with you, Michael. Good seeing you again.
Good to see you.
Until next time.
Yeah, God bless.
See you.